In the late 1970s, following the release of Star Wars, the wider film industry was scrambling to find their own answer to George Lucas's monster sci-fi hit. For Paramount, this led directly to the production of Star Trek the Motion Picture. Disney's response came in the form of Black Hole, but Universal's Star Wars cash-in would go on to have a far more unique legacy among the titans of science fiction. While the impact of Star Wars was certainly a key factor in Battlestar Galactica's development, its origins began far earlier in the 1960s. Glenn A. Larson started out as a singer, songwriter, and composer in the 50s, before moving into television production, working on shows such as The Fall Guy and The Fugitive. His keen interest in science fiction, mythology, and ancient history eventually led to him conjuring up an idea for his own sci-fi series, mentored by Star Trek producer Gene L. Coon. Originally titled Adam's Ark, Larson's idea was a bizarre synthesis of Christian fable, space opera, and chariots of the gods. It told the story of a tribe of humans lost among the stars in search of their ancient brethren on a planet called Earth. For the longest time, the pitch for the series languished in Larson's desk drawer, receiving occasional notes from Gene L. Coon. One such note was to rename the series, with Larson eventually settling on the name Galactica. By the mid-1970s, Larson had proven himself a capable producer to Universal, with hits like $6 Million Man and The Bionic Woman under his belt. Therefore, when the massive success of Star Wars left rival Hollywood studios scrambling to find their own sci-fi epic to compete, Larson was finally given his chance to pitch Galactica. Although Larson was most experienced in television, he pitched Galactica as a 7-hour-long miniseries of TV movies. Universal and the network ABC were highly receptive to the pitch, though they asked Larson to incorporate the word star into the title in some way. Thus, it was given its full title, Battlestar Galactica. Making Battlestar Galactica a miniseries was a smart move, as the format was relatively new at the time and carried a great sense of prestige to it. Usually the miniseries was reserved for rich dramas and adaptations of novels, such as the groundbreaking series Shogun and Roots. Battlestar Galactica then was billed as the prestige drama of science fiction, a show which could match the big screen spectacle of Star Wars and provide its characters with rich long-running arcs. To ensure Battlestar Galactica could do the former, the production actually brought on several Star Wars veterans, such as legendary concept artist Ralph McQuarrie, who designed all of the spaceships and many costumes, as well as John Dykstra, who invented the motion control camera system at Industrial Light and Magic used for the visual effects in Star Wars. The initial design for what would become the iconic Viper fighter craft was originally a flat rectangular shape with large thrusters on either side. While the Viper would evolve into the familiar triple thruster design with a long, slim fuselage, this initial design was later used in Buck Rogers and the 25th Century, which was also produced by Glenn A. Larson. McQuarrie also recommended artist Andrew Probert, who was brought on to design the Cylon Centurions. Star Trek fans will know Probert's later contributions to Star Trek the Motion Picture, and for designing the Enterprise D in Star Trek The Next Generation. Originally, Probert made the Cylons a greenish bronze color, something which was kept for specific models of Cylon, but Larson preferred the shining silver chrome look. In the early conceptual stages of the pilot movie, the Cylons were not intended to be robots at all. Instead, Larson and Probert worked under the idea of the Cylons being some kind of reptilian alien. Their helmets were created to help these aliens see better, and their suits of armor were meant to be spacesuits. This reptilian alien concept existed quite far into production, with an elaborate monster suit being made for the Cylon Imperious leader, who sports a small pet lizard on his arm. but at the time the series was being made, there was a body count limit imposed on primetime television shows, which would make it difficult for the show's heroes to fight the Cylons in the planned action sequences. Thus, in order to get around this limitation, Larson and Probert changed them to robots instead. Footage showing the Imperious leader's face went unused. Later in the show, dialogue explains that the Cylons were originally created by a race of reptilian aliens to be used as foot soldiers. But these Cylons later rebelled and exterminated their creators before expanding their territory into the mighty Cylon Empire. To make the Cylon Centurions appropriately intimidating, all actors playing the Cylons had to be well over 6 feet tall. The Cylon voices were created by sound designer Michael Santiago using the EMS Vocoder 2000. To play the commander of the Battlestar Galactica Adama, Canadian actor Lorne Greene won the role. Lorne Greene was a household name on American television at the time, due to his long-running role as Ben Cartwright in the Western drama Bonanza, which ran for 14 years. He was also a veteran of the stage, flexing his skills as the thespian in a number of notable Shakespeare productions. Richard Hatch actually turned down the offer to play Apollo 3 times, not even reading the script. He had a low opinion of science fiction at the time and assumed Battlestar Galactica wouldn't be serious drama. When he was finally convinced to read the script, he loved it. Hatch, like Greene, also got his acting start on stage. But before BSG, he had won acclaim as Detective Dan Robbins in the streets of San Francisco, taking over from Michael Douglas, who previously occupied the lead role. In contrast to Hatch, Dirk Benedict was desperate for a regular acting gig. Although he made an impression as the psychotic William Calder in the thriller W, his first starring role was on the short-lived Chopper 1, and other TV roles were few and far between. Landing Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica was essentially his career break, and he would gain further popularity in the 80s as Face in the A-Team. Canadian actor John Colicos, like Lorne Greene, broke into television from theatre. From the 60s onwards, he was a reliable villain on television, appearing as the Klingon Kur in Star Trek the original series, and in 3 different episodes of Mission Impossible as 3 different villains. Naturally, his theatrical style of villainy made him an ideal fit for the role of Gaius Baltar. Playing the second-in-command of the Battlestar Galactica was Terry Carter as Colonel Ty. Before landing the role, Carter worked as a TV newscaster at WBZ-TV in Boston and as an actor, appearing in sitcoms like The Phil Silvers Show and dramas such as Breaking Point and Combat. Second in command of the Viper Squadrons was Lieutenant Boomer, played by Herbert Jefferson Jr. Before BSG, Jefferson appeared in many acclaimed miniseries, such as Rich Man, Poor Man, The Law, and The Bastard. He would work with Glenn A. Larson again in the pilot for Knight Rider, and with BSG writer-producer Donald P. Belisario in the pilot for Airwolf. Playing Adama's daughter Athena was Maren Jansen. Jansen had been a model for most of her career, with only one acting role in the Hardy Boys' Nancy Drew Mysteries before Battlestar Galactica. Though Athena would pine after Starbuck, he would eventually fall for Cassiopeia, played by Laurette Sprang. Sprang had also worked with Larson before, making an appearance in The $6 Million Man, among many other guest roles on television. Playing Apollo's eventual wife Serena, a reporter turned Viper pilot, was English actress Jane Seymour. Seymour was already a rising star at the time she was cast in the role, having appeared as Solitaire in the James Bond film Live and Let Die, and would go on to star opposite Christopher Reeve in Somewhere in Time. Playing Serena's son Boxey was a then 6-year-old Noah Hathaway. Hathaway would later gain fame as Atreyu in The Neverending Story. The filming of Battlestar Galactica was truly massive in scope, easily the largest production for a television series at the time, with a then unprecedented spend of over $1 million per episode. The first TV movie, Saga of a Star World, cost over $8 million alone, though some estimates are even higher. The sets for the Galactica itself were enormous, with the bridge set taking up an entire soundstage. The series also made use of location shooting. California State University North Ridge and Long Beach Public Library were used as the surface of the colonial capital Caprica, as well as the Cylon-occupied world of Gamma Ray, later seen in the 4th TV movie The Living Legend. Playing the mysterious world of Kobol was a combination of Red Rock State Park in California and second unit footage of Egypt. Because of the grandiose nature of Battlestar Galactica's production, director Richard A. Culla opted to shoot the first TV movie like a theatrical feature film. He chose to have darker, high-contrast lighting, moving camera, and ensemble staging wherever possible. This was counter to the usual approach directors took to television, where standard coverage and a reliance on close-ups provided more options in the editing room to ensure episodes came in under the proper runtime. This led to several clashes between Culla and ABC higher-ups, who believed Culla's shooting style risked the production falling behind schedule and going over budget. Despite how well Culla worked with many of the cast, the director was not asked to come back for future Galactica episodes. This network interference also impacted the intended tone of the series, as ABC were adamant that Galactica be kid-friendly. Any hints of violence or sex had to be toned down considerably. A love scene between Starbuck and Cassiopeia, which originally featured Dirk Benedict topless, had to be reshot with both actors fully clothed. The drive to appeal to children also led to the child character Boxy being featured more prominently, and the addition of his Daggett Muffet. Rather than going to the expense of creating an elaborate animatronic, Muffet was played by a poor chimpanzee in a suit. For the visual effects, John Dykstra's company Apogee Effects created scale miniatures of all spacecraft, which were then shot using a motion-controlled camera and composited together with an optical printer. Matte paintings were also used extensively, most notably to create the city skyline on Caprica. For the Viper cockpit shots, a 1:1 scale model of the cockpit was built for the actors. Finished effects footage was then projected behind the Viper models using rear projection and played live, though it took quite a bit of effort to get the timing right.
The loops that they used on the projection behind us were very short. That's why I think you'd have 3 seconds or 6 seconds to watch it react and then say your line.
And action! Starbuck! Holy frack! Apollo! All right, let's do it again. Ready? And action! Starbuck! Holy frack! Apollo!
They're all around us.
Okay. Ready? One more. We got one more.
Maybe I should get us.
And action! Starbuck! Holy frack! Apollo! Okay, cut.
I can do love scenes in 3 seconds. But I couldn't do the Viper shots.
The music for the series was composed by Stu Phillips and performed by the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra. The main theme, however, was co-composed by Glenn A. Larson himself, who drew on his own musical background in collaboration with Phillips. Unlike typical television music, which is often cut up and reused, Phillips endeavored to create as full a score as possible for Battlestar Galactica.
I am a person who hates to have music cut up by a music editor in order to make it fit. I like to try to write it so it fits. And up to the very, very last moment on the scoring stage with the Philharmonic there, I was getting changes from my music editor, trying to fix them on the stand and the podium, which of course takes time. And I was getting harassed by Glenn, who was saying to me, just play it the way you wrote it and we'll fix it later. We'll cut it up later. And I just didn't want to do that, and I kept doing my best to rearrange it, reorchestrate it, or reconceive it while I was there with the orchestra. And fortunately, I got enough of it done that to me the score doesn't sound like it's cut into pieces, but there was a lot of anxiety going on there.
Because of the enormous expense of the production, and out of a desire to make Galactica event viewing, ABC and Universal created a 2-hour feature film version of Saga of a Star World, and released it in cinemas in the US and UK, as well as much of South America and Europe. The 2-hour cut of the pilot had some significant deviations from the later series. Notably, Gaius Baltar is killed off by the Cylons towards the end. However, the show's producers liked John Colicos so much, they decided to remove this from the TV version and keep Baltar as a recurring villain. The theatrical version released several months ahead of the show's premiere, and after a surprisingly strong box office, the series proper debuted on the 17th of September, 1978. And now a quick word from this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes. In an age of isolation and AI slop, Skillshare's classes are taught by real people with real passions who want to help you build real skills rather than outsourcing your thinking to a machine. Recently I've been learning visual effects, and Rowan Lauter's Fusion and Blender VFX Masterclass has been a huge help in growing my skills. Although I've been using DaVinci Resolve for a while now, the Fusion page has always been a bit of a mystery, while Blender was totally uncharted territory. But this class breaks down the entire visual effects workflow clearly and concisely, covering camera tracking, character animation, and compositing, which has been a terrific introduction to this kind of work. And Skillshare offers a wide range of high-quality classes like this on everything from business development to arts and crafts. The first 500 people to use the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen will get their first month completely free when they join. Thank you once again to Skillshare for helping support this channel. What's immediately striking about Battlestar Galactica even today is just how epic and grand it looks and feels. It's easy to see why Universal decided to release a version of the pilot in cinemas, because looking at it now, especially on Blu-ray, it feels much more like watching a feature film rather than a TV show. Even Star Trek The Next Generation, which premiered almost a decade later, still had that flat, stagey television look to it. Galactica, on the other hand, is presented with gorgeous lighting and moving masters, not to mention the terrific visual effects by John Dykstra's team. While they don't quite match ILM's standard established in Star Wars, these shots succeed in creating a similar sense of speed and dynamism. The design work here is also stellar. Ralph McQuarrie's contributions certainly resemble his work on Star Wars in the broad strokes, but BSG is packed with plenty of its own spaceships and aliens which are just as memorable. The Viper is just as incredible looking as any X-Wing, and the Galactica itself, chrome-plated Cylon Centurions and enormous base stars are all instantly iconic from the start. But it's Stu Phillips' score which really manages to cement Battlestar Galactica's identity as something more than a mere Star Wars clone. The main theme alone is a masterwork of composition, punchy orchestral bursts linked by a short melody played with horns, which is then complemented by a counter-melody in high trumpets, and then the entire piece comes alive as the drums kick in and the brass and strings blast out the main motif. The rest of the score is filled with wonderful flourishes, such as the short, domineering Cylon motif and the tender, moving love themes. Stu Phillips and John Williams were definitely pulling from the same genre of music, but there's no mistaking Battlestar for Star Wars and vice versa. Speaking of genre, the cast are all strong precisely because they all seem to get exactly what kind of story they're playing in. For a group of actors who cut their teeth on police procedurals and medical dramas, they all manage to nail the operatic tone the story calls for. Lorne Greene as Commander Adama becomes the anchor of the entire show through his sheer gravitas. His voice alone carries an Orson Welles-like power and warmth, which instantly makes Greene the center of any scene every time he opens his mouth. But beyond his vocal talent is his wonderfully subtle facial acting and body language, maintaining a steely exterior for his duties as commander, yet at the same time showing heartbreak, grief, humor, and exaltation clear as day. This is why Richard Hatch as Apollo is so successful, because of the nuanced contrasts and similarities between himself and Adama. While Apollo is much more expressive and passionate, Hatch is still totally believable as someone who could one day grow into a person with a similar stature as Adama, which is also why Dirk Benedict's Starbuck and Hatch's Apollo make for such a great double act. While Adama represents Apollo's future, Starbuck reminds him of his present. It's easy to dismiss Starbuck's character as some kind of Han Solo ripoff, but while Dirk Benedict certainly has a similar cowboy swagger, Starbuck's earnestness and lack of cynicism is wholly different from Harrison Ford's turn in Star Wars. There are just as many scenes of Starbuck being nervous and awkward as there are of him gambling, drinking, or flirting. He essentially serves as Apollo's conscience, embodying the heart of the show overall. Instead of Starbuck's status as a hotshot fighter pilot being used by the writers to beat the viewer over the head with how cool he is, Starbuck is genuinely likable and endearing. However, if there was a prize for being over the top, it would absolutely go to John Colicos for his performance as Baltar. Baltar is essentially as close to pure evil as a person can be. He lies, cheats, and schemes when he's down on his luck, but as soon as he has any semblance of power, Baltar exhibits a kind of Machiavellian glee as he plots the destruction of the colonies and later Galactica and the fleet. It's no wonder the producers decided against killing Baltar off, as it's clear Kolokos is having a blast in the role, going above and beyond in his character's function of providing the cold robotic Cylons with a human face. The first outing for Battlestar Galactica, the three-parter saga of a Star World, kicks things off very well. Our introduction to the characters and their various relationships is woven in effortlessly with the action as the Cylons make their surprise attack on the colonial fleet. The fun of the spectacular effects is soon undercut by tragedy as the planet Caprica is bombed. The dramatic weight of events is effectively communicated when Adama and Apollo go down to the planet's surface, with Adama picking through the charred rubble of his home. It's one of the rare times where Adama's emotions overwhelm him, and Lorne Greene's acting is impeccable.
Maybe Mother wasn't here. Oh, she was here. She was here.
Following the destruction of the colonies and the start of the quest to find Earth, the episode continues strong as the dark realities of life in the fleet reveal themselves. Supply shortages, traumatized refugees, and the cultural baggage of life in the colonies being pulled along with them. Unfortunately, this dark tone isn't maintained for long, as the fleet's arrival at the resort planet Carillon brings with it broad comedy and the introduction of the kid-friendly Muffet. Upon arrival at Carillon, the larger plot grinds to a halt, with Adama being the only one to suspect an obvious Cylon trap. The frustration isn't helped by the Council of 12, the civilian leadership of the Colonials, acting like complete morons, which would seemingly become their only function as the show went on. Although the climax is a solid multi-thread action set piece, it's a real slog to get there and brings down an otherwise great start to the series. Lost Planet of the Gods is a much stronger follow-up to the initial three-parter, so much so that one could easily skip straight to it after finishing part 1 of Saga of a Star World. Here the fleet is forced to travel through a dark void to escape the Cylons, eventually coming across the planet Kobol, the ancestral home of humanity where life began. What makes Lost Planet of the Gods work so well is how fast and how far it moves the characters forward. Cassiopeia becomes a permanent member of the medical staff, Athena and Serena become Viper pilots, and Apollo becomes a husband and father. In truth, the love story between Apollo and Serena moves along too fast, but it's enjoyable to see this many characters going through such big changes, evolving these relationships whereas other shows would have them stick to a strict status quo. This willingness to take the story in surprising and bold directions is most exemplified by the shocking death of Serena at the end of the episode. It's a pretty heartbreaking loss for the show, the performances of the actors being coloured by their real-life sadness over Jane Seymour leaving the series. It's a good thing this death was allowed to be played straight, as the weight of this loss is allowed to linger. ABC's edict to make sure Battlestar Galactica was never too dark being kept at bay for once.
I don't want her to go. I don't want her to go.
I know, but it's her body that's gone boxy, not her spirit. Or her love for us. We'll have that always.
Following the box office success of Saga of a Star World and hype for the series guaranteeing high ratings, ABC abruptly decided to change Battlestar Galactica's format from a miniseries of TV movies to a weekly show. Communicated through Glenn A. Larson, this announcement caught the entire cast and crew completely off guard. Not only did the writers suddenly have to come up with 13 new scripts for a slate of 1-hour episodes, but more costumes had to be made, more sets needed to be constructed, and guest stars had to be cast. The format switch turned an already demanding production into a mad scramble to deliver episodes on time.
It was a killer. I mean, we were working around the clock.
We were getting scenes at the last minute. We were getting scripts at the last second. Right before you're going to shoot. Hey, here's the rewrite. Wait, we're shooting!
Oh, sometimes we got the rewritten pages the day after we'd shot it. We'd already shot the other stuff and they sent new pages. We did this yesterday.
I remember it was Monday and we were waiting for a go-ahead on our next script. Wednesday afternoon, about 3:30 or maybe even later, we got the go-ahead to write Murder on the Rising Star. We had a log line. We had murder occurs, blah, blah, blah. We had no story. That had to be finished in Mimeo Friday morning at 7 o'clock. We didn't go home.
We spent a great deal of time learning the changes. And it really kept us all out of trouble because we didn't have time for a social life. We were so busy learning what we had to do.
There's one scene that we're all sitting around a table having a strategy meeting. We literally had been given those pages that morning. If you look at the scene, there's an awful lot of deep thinking going on. There's a lot of people going, well, I think, and then I think Herb actually like rocks back in his chair and does this, and he's looking at the post where his words are.
The production of additional episodes was also complicated by an ongoing lawsuit from Fox and Lucasfilm, who accused ABC Universal of plagiarizing Star Wars. While this legal battle was eventually resolved without trial, it did impact Battlestar Galactica's visual effects department. As part of the lawsuit, George Lucas claimed that John Dykstra had used equipment legally owned by ILM to produce Galactica's effects without permission. As part of the settlement, Dykstra returned the equipment to ILM, and Apogee Effects parted ways with the show, though their completed shots continue to be reused throughout the series. Additional visual effects work was handled by Universal's own in-house team. The moment Battlestar Galactica shifts from a prestige miniseries to a weekly show is readily apparent in the finished episodes. After 2 feature film-worthy outings with high production values and compelling drama, the hastily written standalone Galactica episodes don't fare as well. These episodes have a much cheaper feel to them as they rely on standing backlot sets and stock costumes. Dykstra's effects footage is also reused so often in these episodes that what was once spectacular and impressive becomes quite pedestrian. Moving to a more traditional space show format also has the side effect of stifling many of the characters. While no one's performances are any weaker, because of a now established status quo which has to be maintained episode to episode, the characters end up standing still for much of the season. While Apollo grew tremendously in the first 5 episodes, he and Starbuck et al. Are largely stagnant for the following 5 episodes. On the whole, it feels as though the series enters a kind of identity crisis. Is this prestige television with no expense spared and a grand story and larger-than-life characters, or a weekly series of kid-friendly sci-fi morality tales which relies on familiar, comfortable TV tropes? While the latter doesn't necessarily detract from the former, a lot of Battlestar Galactica does end up feeling like filler. That being said, it's not as if these individual episodes are awful by any means. They simply feel rather perfunctory next to such lavish epics. And while the Crash of the Week episodes following Lost Planet of the Gods make up the weakest portion of the show, it's clear the writing team became more comfortable with these standalone episodes later on in production. Fire in Space is classic disaster movie filmmaking, featuring some impressive stunt work. Murder on the Rising Star is a robust procedural which makes good use of the ensemble cast, and Baltar's Escape is elevated considerably by placing John Colicos front and center for almost all of the runtime. In general, these later episodes are elevated significantly by the addition of some notable guest stars, such as the iconic Fred Astaire in The Man with 9 Lives. In the middle of the glut of Crash of the Week episodes, though, is Battlestar Galactica's 3rd TV movie, Gun on Ice Planet Zero. In a way, this 2-parter embodies the show's sudden identity crisis better than anything else. Part 1 is honestly fantastic. The crew discover they have been funneled into a trap by the Cylons, when they must pass by a planet housing a surface-to-space superweapon, or turn around and face the full might of the Cylon fleet. After a Viper patrol is almost completely wiped out by the weapon, Adama and Apollo assemble a specialist strike team to land and destroy the weapon. However, the only people in the fleet with the right skills are all hardened criminals. What follows in Part 1 is a surprisingly dark and gritty action-adventure story. Leading the strike team, Apollo has to constantly fight to stay in control of his mutinous and violent team members, many of whom are just waiting for their chance to murder the colonial warriors and flee. All the while, they also have to contend with the harsh environment of the ice planet, where they risk being frozen to death where they stand, or falling into a Cylon ambush. Meanwhile, Starbuck is racked with guilt over the capture of one of his trainee pilots, whom he feels responsible for, and will stop at nothing to ensure he is freed. It's a terrific direction to take Starbuck's character in, as the usually flippant ace pilot starts to doubt himself. What should be perhaps the best episode of the entire show, ampled by an ensemble of interesting characters, familiar and new, and propelled by a mounting tension as the fleet draws ever closer to the superweapons range, is ultimately brought down by a bizarre tonal shift in Part 2. Part 1 already suffered from the contrived inclusion of Boxy and Muffet stowing away on the mission, but Part 2 suddenly turns into a completely different story altogether. The strike team is rescued by a subterranean race of clones, created by a mad scientist who originally built the superweapon threatening the fleet, and who has been conscripted by the Cylons. The episode loses its focus, no longer interested in the compelling power struggle between the colonial warriors and vengeful prisoners, but instead dedicates much of its runtime to a far thinner plot of this clone workforce rising up against the Cylons. What started out as a gritty, character-driven adventure gives way to tropes which would feel far more appropriate in a 1930s Flash Gordon serial. Thankfully, the 4th and 5th multiparters don't succumb to the same problems. The living legend sees the Galactica encounter another surviving Battlestar, the Pegasus commanded by Kane, played by Lloyd Bridges, who recommends Adama turn his fleet around and attack the Cylons rather than continue fleeing. Although for me, Lloyd Bridges is forever associated with his roles in the Jim Abrams Zuckerbrother comedies he appeared in, he embodies the jingoistic energy of Kane rather well. Another welcome addition to the cast introduced in The Living Legend is Anne Lockhart as Kane's daughter, Sheba. Sheba essentially completes a trio of heroes which we as viewers didn't know we were missing until it's on screen. Apollo and Starbuck are a robust double act, but Sheba's presence creates a whole new chemistry which is both fun scene to scene, Sheba often matching wits with Starbuck and developing a friendly rivalry, but also sets the stage for longer arcs down the road, with a burgeoning romance between Sheba and Apollo. Behind the scenes, Lockhart, despite being a late addition to the cast, made fast friends among the other actors, which is evident on screen. It's a shame though that Sheba's joining the show came at the expense of Mara Jansen's Athena, who features less and less as the series goes on. Allegedly, this was a result of an ABC executive having a low opinion of Jansen's acting ability, something I can't say I agree with. The 5th multi-part episode, War of the Gods, offers us a tantalizing glimpse of the larger mythology of Battlestar Galactica, when Apollo, Starbuck, and Sheba rescue the mysterious Count Ibley, who soon proves to be much more than meets the eye. Guest star Patrick Macnee mesmerizes as he pours honey in the ears of the Fleet Council and slowly takes control from the shadows, with even Sheba falling under his spell and Baltar being led into captivity by the Count's strange powers. War of the Gods is really an interesting watch for all of the potential it sets up for the show going forward. The mysterious Ship of Lights, Ibley's possible connection to the creation of the Cylons, and Adama revealing his own extraordinary abilities. Ibley makes for a strikingly effective villain. Patrick Macnee's voice alone gives him a screen presence which rivals the great Lorne Greene, and his powers, both subtle and miraculous, make for a refreshing kind of conflict, one which cannot be solved with the usual reuse of space battle footage or exchange of laser gun fire. A fact which is hammered home when Ibley, his true demonic form revealed, strikes Apollo dead with a bolt of energy from his hand. Apollo's life force is only restored by the Ship of Lights, the angelic crew of which imply they are a form of life who were once very much like humans. While continuing battles with the Cylons have, for the most part, been enough to sustain the series, the implication that this conflict may only be a part of something much more cosmic is intriguing. Intrigue which is only deepened when it appears the mysterious angels have somehow given Apollo, Starbuck, and Sheba the knowledge to find Earth.
Earth Quadrant Alpha, 19 million sectars by
Epsilon Vector 22.
In a star system with 9 planets and 1 sun.
As the originally planned finale for Battlestar Galactica's first year, it makes for a compelling hook for future adventures for the Galactica and its ragtag fugitive fleet. Unfortunately, following this great two-parter is another low point for the series. Beginning with the overly long greetings from Earth, a new recurring foe is introduced in the form of the Eastern Alliance, a fascistic totalitarian power native to the planet Terra, which is not the same planet as the much sought-after Earth. The Eastern Alliance are yet another consequence of the sudden format change, a way of using generic human henchmen in stock costumes again. Compared to the visually striking and intimidating Cylons, the Eastern Alliance simply pale in comparison as villains. It's telling that the episode they feature best in is one where they take a back seat to John Colicos in the aforementioned Baltar's escape. Luckily, the end of the show essentially brings Battlestar Galactica back to its core elements. In the Hand of God, Galactica encounters a Cylon base star lying in wait ahead of it, but instead of turning around, Adama decides to attack. Hand of God is really a showcase of Battlestar Galactica's strengths as a show. The war between Colonial and Cylon embodies a classic space opera trope, facilitating flashy effects and spectacular action, but it's also the engine which drives much of the character drama. By this point, the show had done a good job of communicating to the viewer how evenly matched a Battlestar and a base star are, and so there's real tension at play as the Colonials plan their attack. Not only does the climax involve the usual dogfights between Vipers and Cylon wings, and slugging match between Galactica and the base star, but also a daring raid by Apollo and Starbuck to sabotage the enemy mothership from within. Most of the final battle is made up of the same stock footage as before, but the context elevates that footage back to its original heights. The characters and larger story are also pushed forward again as the romance between Apollo and Sheba finally pays off, and the Galactica receives a strange transmission, which the audience is sure to recognize.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Unfortunately, this lingering thread would be left dangling as Battlestar Galactica was cancelled after its first season. While the series initially enjoyed box office success and high ratings, the show was never particularly liked by critics at the time. Battlestar Galactica was often dismissed as a cheap imitation of the more well-liked Star Wars. Whether this perception of the show contributed to its declining ratings following the pilot is unknown, but ABC's attempts at combating the falling viewership by constantly shifting the show's time slot certainly didn't help. The format change also saw the already expensive production go over budget. Thus, by April 1979, Battlestar Galactica was cancelled. Despite its reputation in certain circles, Battlestar Galactica had quietly accrued a passionate fanbase who were outraged at the show's cancellation. Mirroring the fan reception to Star Trek the original series, ABC and Universal were then inundated with a massive letter-writing campaign, praising the series and demanding it be renewed. It's more than likely that such fierce backlash caused Battlestar Galactica's rights holders to give pause and reconsider. Although Galactica's ratings had fallen after its pilot, it still took a hefty chunk of the audience share each week. If Battlestar Galactica could be modified into a less expensive series, it could find an audience and become a profitable series for the network. By the end of the summer in 1979, they reached out to Glenn A. Larson about a possible Galactica spin-off. With the goal of bringing down the budget in mind, Glenn A. Larson and producer Donald P. Bellisario decided to set the spin-off series 5 years after Hand of God, allowing them to cut out several cast members. The only returning characters would be Adama, Boomer, Apollo, Starbuck, and Baltar. The premise saw the fleet finally reach Earth, discovering it to be our own Earth in the modern day. As it is woefully unprepared to combat the Cylons, Baltar, now redeemed and leader of the Council of 12, suggests using time travel technology to alter Earth's past, and bring its technology level up so it can defeat the Cylons once and for all. When this idea is rejected, Baltar steals a ship and disappears into the past, pursued by Apollo and Starbuck. This new spin-off would then see the duo embark on a new time mission each week, as they try to foil Baltar's plans to change Earth history. When it came to casting, Dirk Benedict was unavailable, and Richard Hatch turned down the project after reading the script for the pilot. Therefore, the premise was altered slightly. Rather than 5 years after Hand of God, the spin-off would be set 30 years later, following Captain Troy, who is revealed to be a now adult Boxey, and Lieutenant Dillon as they attempt to foil, not Baltar, but a new character called Commander Xavier from changing Earth's past. Playing the grown-up Boxey Troy was Kent McCord. He was best known for playing rookie police officer James A. Reed in the police drama Adam 12. He would return to science fiction in the 90s, appearing in SeaQuest DSV and Farscape. Playing Dillon was Barry Van Dyke, son of legendary actor and entertainer Dick Van Dyke. Galactica 1980 was his first starring role on television. Afterwards, he would find later success starring alongside his father in Diagnosis Murder and Murder 101. A new character, the child prodigy Dr. Z, was played by a young James Patrick Stewart, who would go on to have a successful TV career in the 90s and 2000s. After production of the pilot wrapped, ABC decided they disliked the time travel aspect of the premise, therefore Glenn A. Larson removed it from the show. Going forward, the series would be about Troy and Dylan trying to subtly advance Earth technology so it could one day compete with the Cylons. 8 months after the cancellation of Battlestar Galactica, its spin-off Galactica 1980 premiered on the 27th of January 1980. Whereas the original Battlestar Galactica sought to break the mold of 70s TV, its spin-off effort feels formulaic and tired. None of the essentials which made Battlestar Galactica special carry over to Galactica 1980. The epic operatic tone, the huge scope, the spectacular visuals are all gone. Even the score sounds strangely thin and cheap. Troy and Dylan can't help but feel like shallow imitations of Starbuck and Apollo. Unlike their predecessors, the leads of Galactica 1980 are given virtually nothing to do. So much of their dialogue is purely expositional. Kent McCord and Barry Van Dyke try their best to inject some charisma into the proceedings, but are given so little to work with. There's none of the heroic conviction Richard Hatch brought to Apollo, and none of the charisma Dirk Benedict brought to Starbuck. Troy and Dylan are simply paper-thin imitations of much better characters. Easily the character who is hated most by fans is Dr. Z, who seemed to be part of a trend of genius-level youngsters in sci-fi shows, like Doctor Who's Adric and Star Trek's Wesley Crusher. While I don't think Dr. Z is bad in concept, the character's inclusion in Galactica 1980 sadly comes at the expense of Adama. The once proud and authoritative commander is reduced to Z's weak and ineffectual lackey. Though Adama is still supposedly in command of the fleet, on more than one occasion Z seems to give direct orders to Adama. Now, considering in the 30-year gap between shows, Adama supposedly lost his only remaining son, his daughter, and the found family among most of the other Galactica crew save Boomer, it would be understandable as to why Adama behaves this way in Galactica 1980. If this was worked into some kind of character arc, it could have been very interesting. But Adama's new characterization seems to be more the result of the format change rather than intended as a story direction. It doesn't help that James Patrick Stewart plays Z with such an aloof pomposity that it's easy to see why so many viewers reacted negatively to the character. It's possible Z's inclusion was yet another attempt by ABC to make the show appeal primarily to children. Not only does Galactica 1980 look cheaper than ever, but its tone is also unbearably light-hearted and silly. Entire episodes revolve around a troop of kid scouts acquiring magical powers or a wacky baseball game. Other episodes which aren't predominantly kid-focused are padded out by tired comedic scenes where Troy and Dylan struggle to understand Earth culture.
Through the scanner.
Scanner?
Must not fly much. Scanner. You know, metal detector. To prevent hijacking?
Oh, sure. Hijacking. Right. Hijacking.
The only interesting addition to the Battlestar Galactica mythos is the introduction of human-form Cylons, though this likely came about yet again out of budget concerns. It's very telling that the only truly strong episode of Galactica 1980 sees Dirk Benedict guest star in The Return of Starbuck. It truly highlights just how uninteresting Troy and Dylan are as leads when Dirk Benedict walks back into the Starbuck role as if he never left it. The Return of Starbuck sees the fan-favourite character marooned on a desolate planet, where his only companion is a reactivated Cylon, which Starbuck calls Psy. The Return of Starbuck is an enjoyable riff on the World War II film Hell in the Pacific, which would also later be pastiched in Wolfgang Petersen's Enemy Mine, as the two bitter enemies are forced to work together to survive. Most of the episode is simply a terrific showcase of Dirk Benedict's charming performance as Starbuck, as he bounces off the endearing Psy, voiced by Gary Owens.
I had 4 pyramids. You only had 3.
No, wait a second. Who's teaching who?
The correct use of your language is who is teaching whom.
That being said, the episode does lose some of its focus when Starbuck encounters a mysterious pregnant woman named Angela. What begins as the fun double act between Starbuck and Psy ends up turning into Starbuck caring for Angela. Even so, the climax of the episode works well, as Starbuck uses his only chance at escape to save Angela and face the newly arrived Cylons in a tense standoff, which ends in Sai's death.
Sai, it's just you and me now. One human and one Cylon.
No, Starbuck. Not human. Not Cylon. Friends.
Despite the episode getting a little distracted in the second half, Angela's inclusion as Z's mysterious mother at least hints at that larger mythology glimpsed in War of the Gods. And like the end of Battlestar Galactica, at least Galactica 1980 ends on a high. Predictably, the critical and fan reception of Galactica 1980 was overwhelmingly negative. With dwindling viewership, the show was cancelled after only 10 episodes were aired. It would be natural to think the legacy of Battlestar Galactica at the time would be one of failure. A soulless cash grab attempting to ape the success of Star Wars, which failed because it was too expensive and too shallow. But that is not how history remembers Battlestar Galactica. There is much more to Battlestar Galactica than a failed Star Wars clone. In many respects, it was far ahead of its time. An attempt by Glenn A. Larson to tell an epic sci-fi television novel, one which could match the spectacle of the big screen, but with the rich long-form storytelling the small screen afforded. This was a concept which would eventually be successfully embodied by the likes of J. Michael Straczynski's Babylon 5 decades later, but in the late 1970s it wasn't to be. More often than not, the creative vision of Battlestar Galactica was compromised by commercial interests and a desire to play things safe. It's a real shame because it's not as if Battlestar Galactica didn't have the potential to be truly great. In spite of the Star Wars comparisons, the show succeeded in creating its own unique sci-fi universe, with its own iconography, look, sound, and feel. The entire cast was strong across the board. The characters themselves were pushed forward many times in compelling and unexpected ways. There was real heart to Battlestar Galactica, which I think is the core reason why it endures to this day. I first encountered BSG when I was a kid watching reruns taped off the TV on VHS. Naturally, as I was hip deep in Star Trek and Star Wars at the time, I took a natural shine to the show. As I've grown older, I've recognized a lot of its flaws, but I also recognize its strengths. As a fan, I've spent a lot of time imagining what could have been with this show, but as it is, I'll always have a fondness for Battlestar Galactica. Although the original series may have been a hell of a swing which ultimately missed, in the new millennium, Battlestar Galactica would return to our screens once more, though not in the form anyone was expecting. Despite its unceremonious cancellation and failed spin-off show, Battlestar Galactica remained popular among its cult fanbase, and the iconography of the Cylons, Vipers, and the Galactica itself bled into the wider pop culture. The series had managed to step out of the shadow of the often compared to Star Wars, selling well in international markets and on home video throughout the 80s and 90s. The mythos was further expanded in a range of novels and comic books as well. It was clear to the series' rights holders and to sci-fi fandom overall that there was an appetite for more Battlestar Galactica, but it was unclear exactly what form it should take. An attempt at reinvigorating the series with Galactica 1980 had already failed. The original sets had long been destroyed, and key cast members like Lorne Greene had passed away. Nevertheless, Richard Hatch, who played Apollo in the original series, campaigned for a sequel series called Battlestar Galactica: The Second Coming. He even went so far as creating a proof-of-concept pilot, featuring several returning cast members and new CG effects.
It was the seventh era of mankind. 20 yards had passed since the last Great War. A civilization was reborn. An enemy had grown. And now a new generation will have to face an old foe.
It is done, Imperious Leader.
I must prepare them for the second coming.
He spent much of 1990 touring the convention circuit with a trailer of the proof-of-concept pilot, which received praise from fans and allegedly did interest some of the executives at Universal. Universal, however, were already developing other pitches for a possible Battlestar Galactica revival. One such pitch was a feature film version following the Battlestar Pegasus, produced by original BSG creator Glenn A. Larson and Wing Commander producer Todd Moyer. Another proposal was for a sequel by X-Men producer Tom DeSanto in the form of a miniseries which could serve as a backdoor pilot for a show. A collaboration between Universal and the Fox network, this revival attempt actually got quite far, with concept art created and even some sets beginning construction. However, DeSanto eventually had to abandon the project when production delays caused a scheduling conflict with X-Men 2. The notion of a miniseries which could potentially lead to a full series was still appealing to Universal, and so they approached producer David Icke. David Icke spent much of his career at that point working alongside Sam Raimi on Hercules' Legendary Journeys, Xena Warrior Princess, Darkman, and American Gothic. He had first worked with Universal on the short-lived TV series Cover Me, based on the true life of an FBI family. Icke was interested in taking on the project, and although he was a major cinephile, he didn't have much knowledge of science fiction or the original Battlestar Galactica. Therefore, he sought out Ronald D. Moore. In contrast to Icke, Ronald D. Moore had been working in the science fiction genre for almost all of his professional career up until that point. He got his start on Star Trek Next Generation after submitting a spec script to then showrunner Michael Piller. He would go on to write and/or produce 27 episodes of the show, winning the Hugo Award for co-writing the finale All Good Things and co-writing the feature films Star Trek Generations and Star Trek First Contact. He also contributed massively to Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Moore's time with Star Trek came to an abrupt end when he had a falling out with longtime writing partner Brannon Braga during Moore's brief stint working on Star Trek Voyager. Following Star Trek, Moore became showrunner of the sci-fi series Roswell and consulted on Good vs. Evil, where he met David Icke. When asked by Icke to develop a new Battlestar Galactica, Moore saw it as a chance to evolve the science fiction TV formula, which he believed had become stagnant by the 2000s.
That was really, really important to me, that we weren't going to run into alien cultures, we weren't going to run into other spaceships, we weren't going to do bumpy-headed aliens, and we were going to wipe every one of those cliches off the board that we possibly could.
Rather than taking inspiration from genre giants like Star Trek, Ronald D. Moore instead looked to thriller shows like 24 and political dramas like The West Wing. His ultimate goal was to create a military drama in space. Stylistically, it would resemble a documentary with lots of handheld camera, and the characters, rather than being the paragons of virtue as seen in Star Trek or the grand mythological heroes seen in the original BSG, would be flawed contemporary humans. That being said, Ronald D. Moore was actually quite fond of the original series, and drew heavily from its larger mythos to craft his vision for the new series. The origin of the Cylons as machines who turned against their creators, reptilian aliens in the original series, was transposed onto the Colonials' history instead. Human-form Cylons had previously appeared in Galactica 1980 and the comic books. For the new show, the Cylon Centurions would be entirely CG creations. Therefore, the use of human-looking Cylons was not only practical, but also a great storytelling avenue. Some other notable changes concerned the cast of characters.
Making Starbuck a woman was one of the first things that I thought of, and then as I was sort of stroking out who all the cast of characters were, the original Galactica was just very male-oriented, and trying to just sort of even it up and make it more interesting, some of the roles naturally just became women to make it a more interesting show.
However, these characters, like many others, would also be given a name change. The original names Apollo, Starbuck, Boomer, etc. would be changed to call signs for the various fighter and shuttle pilots. Adama, Tai, and Baltar would also be given new first names. To play Commander William Adama, the script was sent to a number of prominent actors, many of whom rejected it outright based on the title alone.
When we sat with this script that had taken months and months to develop, I was suddenly terrified by something rather unexpected, which was that the title, Battlestar Galactica, made me not really want to turn the page. And I thought, this is potentially disastrous. We've got this magnificent document, this compelling, adult, terrifying, visceral, allegorical piece of science fiction in the truest sense of the word, science fiction in the sense of the word that it had sort of been invented to operate as, which is as an allegory for our times. And yet no one's going to know any of that, because the people who we really want to get excited about this, the director we hire, the actors we hire, are going to see Battlestar Galactica and look at their agent and go, are you kidding me?
One such actor was Edward James Olmos.
So when Battlestar came up, I was not going to read it. And my wife was sitting at the table where we were doing some signing at this book festival, and she opened the script and read 3 pages that Ron Moore wrote at the beginning of the script, like a prologue of what the intention was of the show.
I remember when the first time I met Eddie, and we were sitting down to talk about the character, and he started talking about that, the manifesto. He was like, that thing, it was really profound, and it really made me really see what you're doing. And I was like, I didn't know what he was talking about. I was like, the manifesto, the what? And I kind of looked at David, and I think David kind of like, I don't know what he's talking about. It took us like a few minutes, and then realized, oh, he read that sales thing that we put up.
I was more gratified than ever when Edward James Olmos came in for his first meeting and said, were it not for that document, I never would have read it.
And I remember after Eddie left, talking to David, like, did the actors get that? And he was like, I didn't think the actors got that. I guess they did. And we were like, well, I guess it's all right.
After being convinced to read it, he was greatly impressed by the quality of writing. He accepted the part, but only on the condition the show never feature any aliens, a condition which Aiken Moore happily agreed to.
The moment I see one 4-eyed creature coming at me, I'm going to faint on camera, and I'm off the show.
We wouldn't even, have to book his flight. He'd already be on a plane.
I'm just going to go, ah! And faint away. And then I'm going to stand up after they cut, and I'm going to walk off the show, and you can say, well, he died of a heart attack, or you can do whatever you want to do.
Almost got his start in theatre, his big break coming from his Tony-nominated role in the play Zoot Suit. Off the back of his stage success, he moved into feature films appearing in Blade Runner and The Ballad of Gregorio Cortez. He came close to landing the villainous role of Krug in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, and was actually pursued for the role of Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek The Next Generation, but he was refused the former and declined the latter. Instead, he spent much of the 80s and 90s winning acclaim through numerous roles in independent dramas, such as Stand and Deliver, American Me, and Selena. Playing William Adama's son Lee Apollo Adama was English actor Jamie Bamber. Battlestar Galactica was essentially Bamber's break into American television. Beforehand, he played the regular role of Archie Kennedy in ITV's series of Hornblower TV movies. Completing the main trio of the original show was Katie Sackhoff as Kara Starbuck Thrace. Sackhoff started her acting career in her late teens, making appearances in Undressed and The Education of Max Bickford, before moving into feature films. She appeared in My First Mister and Halloween Resurrection. Like many in the BSG cast, Sackhoff went through numerous auditions before her self-tape was singled out by Aiken Moore's wives. English actor James Callis went through 6 auditions in total before landing the role of Gaius Baltar. Callis was a veteran of the stage, having performed in many West End productions. He had also directed 2 feature films alongside his regular acting work in British TV and film. Playing opposite Callis for much of the series would be the mysterious Number 6, played by Canadian actress Tricia Helfer. Helfer had an extremely successful career as a model before getting her start in acting. Her first role was in the post-apocalyptic drama Jeremiah, and she also appeared in an episode of CSI. Due to her lack of acting experience when she landed her role as 6 in BSG, network executives were unsure of her casting. However, when they viewed dailies of her scenes, they were allegedly so impressed they decided to center the entire miniseries marketing campaign around her character. Another new character was Laura Roslin, the education secretary turned president, played by Mary McDonnell. McDonnell, like Olmos, was a huge get for the series, being a 2-time Academy Award nominated actress for her roles in Dances with Wolves and Passion Fish. Though she was no stranger to science fiction, having appeared in Independence Day and Donnie Darko. Canadian actor Michael Hogan was also no stranger to the genre, having appeared in Millennium, The Outer Limits, and Andromeda before landing the role of Colonel Saul Tigh in BSG. Hogan would also lend his voice to several video games, including Skyrim and the Mass Effect series, which also featured Tricia Helfer. The character Chief Tyrrell was originally envisioned as a much older man than Aaron Douglas, who won the role. After Galactica, Douglas would later make notable appearances in the likes of Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency and Van Helsing. Chief Tyrrell's secret lover, Sharon Boomer Valeri, was played by Grace Park. Before BSG, Park had mostly landed small bit parts in various TV and film productions, including Stargate SG-1 and Dark Angel. She later landed a starring role in the revival of Hawaii Five-0 and appeared in the video game Command & Conquer 3 alongside Tricia Helfer. Filming began on the 1st of April 2003 in and around Vancouver, British Columbia, directed by Australian filmmaker Michael Reimer, with cinematography by Joel Ransom, shooting on 35mm film. The bulk of filming took place at Vancouver Film Studios, where the Galactica interior sets were built. Working with production designer Richard Hewdelin, Ronald D. Moore drew on his experiences touring on the USS W.S. Sims and other visits to US Navy vessels to give the Galactica sets a sense of authenticity. The art department was told to steer away from typical sci-fi genre tropes like sliding doors, touchscreen panels, and holograms. Instead, the world of this new series would skew much closer to our own. Doors aboard ships would be heavy and metallic, phones would have cords, and people would wear normal suits rather than robes. To this end, the Galactica design itself would be augmented, so its hull would resemble a bomb shelter, and its docking pods would retract inside the central body when making FTL jumps. The Viper design from the original series was mostly retained with some slight adjustments to the canopy, engines, and detailing. This nod to the classic design was dubbed Mark II, next to the more advanced Mark VII. The visual effects were handled mostly by Zoic Studios and supervised by Gary Hutzel. Hutzel had previously worked on both Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and Zoic Studios had just come off working on Firefly. As a nod to their previous work, the Serenity actually makes a small cameo near the beginning of the miniseries. In keeping with the intended realistic documentary style, Ronald D. Moore asked for Gary Hutzel to treat the effects as if they were being filmed for real. This led to the inclusion of an overall darker lighting aesthetic, as well as whip pans, snap zooms, and messier framing. The Cylon Centurions were made CG characters after it was decided a performer in a suit would look too cheesy in comparison to the grounded look of the series. The score for the miniseries, composed mostly by Richard Gibbs with additional music from Bear McCreary, also broke with tradition. Rather than a grand orchestral score driven by brass and strings, Gibbs opted for more world music like Japanese taiko drums and Mediterranean woodwinds and vocals. Having waited so long for Battlestar Galactica to return to their screens, the announcement of a remake was met with immediate and fierce backlash from many fans. Further news about the intended tone and style, as well as story and character changes, was met with even more backlash. Dirk Benedict even joined many fans in their disapproval over changing Starbuck to a female character. Initially, there was good feeling towards the new series, with a much publicized meeting between Benedict and Katie Sackhoff, where Benedict passes Sackhoff a cigar as a kind of passing of the torch. However, Benedict would later lambast the show in a tirade featured in Dreamwatch magazine. Another fierce critic was Richard Hatch.
Everybody was very pissed off, to put it mildly, that they were not going to do a continuation of Battlestar Galactica, along with me, who was very upset as well. I had spent almost, I would say, 3 years going to Universal, meeting with the legal office, meeting with executives, pitching the idea of bringing back the show and why it should be brought back. And we had put so much time and energy into it. There had been polls on Sci-Fi Channel, and of course, 80-90% everybody wanted to see a continuation. And I hate to say it, most remakes are, let's say, they suck.
While Ronald D. Moore tried to mitigate this backlash by communicating directly with fans through online forums, something he started doing while working on Deep Space Nine, and Universal tried to downplay the remake aspect by using the term reimagining, it did little to quell fan tempers. This backlash seemingly reached a head before the release of the miniseries when, during a press conference, Edward James Olmos stated outright, "If you're a die-hard fan of the original Battlestar Galactica, please don't watch. Sci-Fi Channel wants you to think everyone will like this. They won't. So please don't watch. Buy the DVD of the original series, and when we're on, pop that in instead. I don't want you writing me any more letters." Regardless of what fans thought, the reimagined Battlestar Galactica premiered on the Sci-Fi Channel on the 8th of December 2003. Whenever I go about yet another rewatch of all the 90s Star Trek shows and Babylon 5 and Farscape and so on, returning to Battlestar Galactica, even after a decade, feels like the genre of space opera television suddenly received some kind of adrenaline shot. To borrow a friend's phrase, Battlestar Galactica marks the end of the plasticine forehead era of science fiction. Those older shows are among my all-time favourites, but even the most die-hard fan has to admit in engaging in immense suspensions of disbelief while watching. The production design in The Next Generation, Babylon 5, Stargate et al. Was always terrific, but we never really believed people were actually crewing spaceships or space stations or visiting alien worlds. We all knew these were plywood sets in Los Angeles or Vancouver. We all recognized the Vasquez Rocks and British Columbian forests. And we all knew many of the aliens encountered week to week were actors wearing hastily designed prosthetics. But that same suspension of disbelief is no longer needed with Battlestar Galactica. This is a world which feels far more tactile and real. It's worth remembering that this show was on the air at the same time as Andromeda, Stargate Atlantis, and Star Trek Enterprise. But while those shows feel firmly rooted in the late 90s and early 2000s, Battlestar Galactica could have come out yesterday. The Galactica looks and feels as close to a real-world Navy vessel without straight-up pulling a silent running and shooting on the USS Valley Forge. It feels functional and believable in a way Star Trek's Enterprise never quite achieved. But beyond the excellent production design, the ship also feels truly lived in. Little things like Adama slurping down noodles or Ty sitting on Adama's jacket feel so authentic and natural and really embodies that documentary feel the show is going for. The new approach to world building also makes this interpretation of the BSG universe feel a lot closer to home than virtually any other sci-fi series. None of this is a result of laziness. Every one of these elements are deliberate choices on the part of the production staff. The original series depicted a mother civilization, but this version of Galactica aims to depict a mirror civilization, a creative goal which also factors heavily into the characters. I often see a lot of the detractors of this series criticizing the characters as being bad examples for the viewer. How can anyone look up to these people, they'll say. To me, this criticism betrays a somewhat narrow view of what characters in a sci-fi show are supposed to be like. This is not Star Trek. The story is not a morality play. The characters are not intended as paragons of virtue for the viewer to admire. Instead, like the world they inhabit, the cast of Battlestar Galactica is intended to function as a mirror for the audience. The crew of the Galactica is made up of rookies and retirees. Older officers like Adama and Ty are content to round out their careers and settle back into civilian life. Tyrrell's deck crew are average Joe grease monkeys, simply putting in their time on a literal museum piece before no doubt moving on to something better. Adama isn't running a tight ship here, in fact is shown to be quite sloppy, with a clearly alcoholic XO and fraternizations during work hours. I can understand why this approach to characterization would be jarring to fans of other sci-fi shows preceding BSG, but it's not a mistake or flaw as so many detractors proclaim it to be. In a way, the new version of Starbucks sums up this more realistic approach nicely. Katie Sackhoff's fantastic turn as Kara Thrace at first seems to embody the classic archetype to a T, a cigar-smoking, card-playing hotshot pilot. But whereas the original series took this archetype and assigned it to Dirk Benedict's charming rogue, the reimagined series decides this is the behavior of a volatile screw-up, who will happily deck her superior officer without any consideration as to the consequences. This same storytelling philosophy is also what turns the relationship between Adama and Apollo from a straight-laced, wise mentor and noble hero into a difficult one between Adama and Lee, where a devastating family tragedy has left them estranged and hostile to one another. This isn't conflict for the sake of conflict. The problems and struggles these characters go through are all ones many of us can relate to as a viewer, even if we wish we didn't. In this strive for realism and relatability wherever possible, the relationship between Gaius Baltar and Number 6 could have stood out as a tonal anomaly, but thanks to some clever writing and outstanding performances, it succeeds in threading the needle. Baltar, rather than being as delightfully evil as John Colicos' take on the character, is vain, egotistical, self-centered, pompous, and cowardly. Yet he still comes across as a real person rather than a caricature. His part in the destruction of the 12 colonies is a result of his weakness rather than his malice. Baltar is truly detestable on paper, but James Callis' performance is also unexpectedly very funny. The lows the character is willing to sink to end up becoming darkly comedic, making the viewer laugh instead of becoming further outraged. Tricia Helfer, meanwhile, is simply an incredible discovery. It's no wonder Universal opted to make Number 6 the centerpiece of their marketing, as Helfer tackles the truly thankless task of sexy robot lady with remarkable poise and intelligence. A near unearthly beauty with a soothing, warm voice, but always with an undercurrent of danger and sense of threat. Helfer also showcases some real versatility in playing multiple versions of the same character. The version later known as Caprica 6 is just as alluring as Head 6, but while Caprica 6 conveys some subtle vulnerability and rage, Head 6 takes on an angelic quality. She's the version of the person Baltar imagines she was. The dynamic between Baltar and 6 is especially fascinating in its ambiguity. 6 could indeed be a chip inside Gaius Baltar's brain, installed there by the Cylons, or he could simply be having a psychotic break. 6 could be feeding him intelligence from the enemy, but then again, she never tells him anything he couldn't infer or deduce on his own. There's also a fresh approach taken with the space-based action. Rather than achieving victory through overwhelming force, the Cylons cripple colonial forces and massacre helpless soldiers and civilians. Rather than hitting the viewer with spectacular space battles, the destruction of the colonies is a terrifying and bleak event, precisely because so much of it happens off-screen. Entire fleets are wiped out via radio reports, cities are engulfed in nuclear fire signaled by ominous mushroom clouds on the horizon. Before Galactica can even get a shot off on the enemy, the war has already been lost. Although the fleet manages to jump away to relative safety, a harsh reality soon sets in, prompting a desperate but convincing rallying call from Adama.
We've jumped way beyond the red line into uncharted space. Limited supplies, limited fuel, no allies, and now, no hope. Where shall we go? What shall we do? Life here began out there. Those are the first words of the sacred scrolls. Elosha, there's a 13th colony of humankind, is there not?
The scrolls tell us a 13th tribe left Kobol in the early days. They traveled far and made their home upon a planet called Earth.
We have a refuge to go to. A refuge that the Cylons know nothing about. On the memory of those lying here before you, we shall find it, and Earth will become our new home. So say we all.
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 Dismissed.
Part 1 of the miniseries debuted to strong, if not extraordinary ratings of 3.2 million viewers. Expecting the usual ratings drop for Part 2, David Icke and Ronald D. Moore were told the miniseries would be considered successful if Part 2 stayed above 2.8 million viewers. It was a surprise to all when Part 2 actually jumped up in the ratings to 3.8 million viewers, making the miniseries one of the Sci-Fi Channel's highest rated programs. Despite the fierce fan backlash, the series appeared to have succeeded in winning over a new audience, as well as critics. The miniseries went on to win the Saturn Award for Best Television Series and earned a further 4 Emmy nominations. It was clear David Icke and Ronald D. Moore's gamble had paid off. The huge departures from typical sci-fi TV traditions had caught the attention of not only longtime fans of the genre, but a broader audience as well. With such high ratings, critical praise, and strong word of mouth, Battlestar Galactica was picked up for a 13-episode first season. Viewing the miniseries as a kind of pilot for the show, Ike and Moore decided to retain some elements and change others. The character Carl Hilo Agathon, played by Tamo Pinniket, was originally meant to be assumed dead after the miniseries. However, the creative team all liked Pinniket's performance so much they decided to keep him on for the first season, leading to the creation of a brand new storyline on Cylon-occupied Caprica. Candice McClure's Duala, Alessandro Giuliani's Gaeta, Nikki Klein's Callie, and Paul Campbell's Billy, originally intended to be one-offs or mere background players, were kept on and developed further as part of the core cast. While director Michael Reimer was hired for further episodes, cinematographer Joel Ransom was replaced with DOP Stephen McNutt, who chose to shoot the series on HD digital cameras as opposed to 35mm film. Bear McCreary, who composed additional music for the miniseries, was promoted to main composer for the actual show. The first season was also co-commissioned by Sky Television. Season 1 premiered in the UK on the 18th of October 2004 and debuted in the US and Canada on the 15th of January 2005. True to form, Season 1 kicks things off by pulling the rug out from under the viewer. Instead of beginning the story with the fleet safe as it was at the end of the miniseries, the series proper throws us into the action. 33 presents us with a high-intensity mystery culminating in Apollo and Starbuck possibly gunning down a ship full of civilians to stop the Cylons tracking their fleet. Water shows us a desperate struggle for survival underpinned by Boomer's spiraling sense of panic as she starts to suspect she may be a Cylon. These first 2 episodes are characteristic of the first season as a whole, a military drama where interpersonal conflicts are deftly woven into high-stakes plots, where difficult political, social, and philosophical questions are raised, usually without solid answers being provided. The early episodes also establish a slightly new look for the show. While the miniseries established the documentary shooting style, the series proper runs with it. Director Sergio Mimica-Gezin in particular opting to shoot almost exclusively with longer lenses and handheld camera. I feel this documentary style can go overboard at times, the camera becoming too shaky and the framing getting too tight. This is especially pronounced in the action scenes. The space-based action is generally captured very well, but land-based shootouts or fight scenes end up far too chaotic and hard to follow at times. Because of the show's larger mission of winning over non-sci-fi fans, the first season features a healthy mix of arc-heavy installments and standalone episodes. Act of Contrition and You Can't Go Home Again pushes the Adama-Kara relationship to the forefront with a thrilling and emotionally hard-hitting adventure.
Kara. Yeah. You did good.
6 Degrees of Separation is essentially a whole hour of James Callis chewing scenery to fantastic results.
Struck a nerve, have I? Which I find rather impossible to believe. You think this is over? This is not over! You have not heard the last! No more Mr. Nice Guys!
The standout among the standalone episodes, however, is easily The Hand of God. Having fled the Cylons for weeks, the fleet is running low on a crucial fuel, and the only source available is guarded by a Cylon base. As a semi-remake of the original series finale, Adama decides to stop running and attack the Cylons directly. The Hand of God is a well-placed piece of emotional catharsis for the audience. The opening 2 episodes do such a brilliant job of pulling the viewer into the grim tone of the series and the desperation of the fleet's situation. The only reprieve the characters get are sparse moments of calm where they have successfully hidden from their Cylon pursuers for a short time. But after running for so long, the episode not only delivers the goods with some spectacular space-based action, but also with its character development. Starbuck, still recovering from her injuries in Act of Contrition, is forced to sit on the sidelines as Lee flies the mission instead, striving to prove his own abilities as a pilot to Kara and commander to his father. The victory is by no means easy and the larger circumstances of the fleet go mostly unchanged, but the feeling of elation which washes over the characters when they succeed in their mission is one of the show's most moving and triumphant moments. And it's here I want to highlight Bear McCreary's music for the show. While Richard Biggs established the musical identity of the series, McCreary takes those initial ideas of the miniseries score and runs with them. The emotional climax of Hand of God is carried beautifully by the surprising use of Gallic folk music, yet for whatever reason it absolutely works, becoming the de facto theme for Lee and his father's relationship. What emerges as the central theme of the first season is the tension between civilian and military rule. The portrayal of civilian government in the original series was always one of its weak points. The Quorum of 12 were, for the most part, elderly idiots whose proposed courses of action were always overtly moronic. A device for Adama to showcase his wisdom and intelligence by contrast. The resulting connotation, intentional or not, is that the military strongman is always right and should never be questioned, while a civilian government is naive, fickle, and corrupt. This implication of the original series is directly addressed in the writing of the reimagined show. The relationship between Commander Adama and President Roslin is easily one of the most potent in the series, precisely because it goes against typical expectations. As their relationship develops over the course of the season, it becomes clear that it is Roslin who is the pragmatist, whereas Adama is the idealist.
You have the only armed, disciplined force.
There's a reason why you separate military and the police. One fights the enemy of the state. The other serves and protects the people. When the military becomes both, then the enemies of the state tend to become the people.
Commander, I won't let that happen.
In the aforementioned You Can't Go Home Again, we see how driven by emotion Adama is, despite how inscrutable Edward James Olmos's expression usually is. Maintaining a hopeless search and rescue for Starbuck long after it's logical, and being shamed into abandoning the search by Roslin.
And if it was me down there instead?
You don't have to ask that.
Are you sure?
If it were you, we'd never leave.
On the other hand, Roslin demonstrates her resourcefulness and cunning in episodes like Flesh and Bone and Colonial Day, sanctioning the torture and execution of a Cylon prisoner and stabbing her political ally in the back to make the more popular Gaius Baltar vice president.
I never thought you'd fit in with the bare-knuckle backstabbing politicians. I guess I was wrong.
It's fair to say that the leadership of the fleet can be seen as illegitimate, a fact pointed out by Richard Hatch's Tom Zarek. Bringing Hatch into the reimagined series was a real coup on the part of the showrunners. Richard Hatch had been a figurehead in the initial fan backlash the show received, objecting to the very idea of a remake in the first place. Hence the inherent marketing value of having the two Apollos literally face off against each other in Bastille Day. After finishing shooting for his first episode, Hatch turned from one of the most vocal critics to one of the most outspoken advocates of the new series. What makes Tom Zarek such a compelling character is both his ambiguity, but also his criticisms of Roslin and Adama actually having a lot of substance. President Roslin is unelected, Adama has abused his military authority, and the desire to maintain the societal structures of the 12 colonies within the fleet doesn't make much sense. Although he may have a checkered past, Zarek is never made out to be an explicit villain in the series. This tension within the leadership of the fleet finally breaks in the season finale Kobal's Last Gleaming. Starbuck feels betrayed when she learns that Adama lied about the existence of Earth, Roslin breaks her promise to Adama by circumventing his authority, and Adama's attempt at removing Roslin from power is further complicated by Lee turning against his superior officer. This chaos serves as the backdrop to Boomer's arc reaching its climax, where her worst fears are confirmed, and she is revealed as a Cylon sleeper agent.
We love you, Sharon, and we always will.
Yet even after this revelation, the emotional repercussions of Roslin's removal from office and Lee's arrest is so prominent in the viewer's mind that we are completely unprepared for this moment.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Battlestar Galactica's first season was an immense success for the Sci-Fi Channel and Universal. It had even managed to overcome the initial fan backlash and accrue its own dedicated following, helped considerably by Ronald D. Moore's online interactions with fans via regular forum posts and a concurrent podcast of episode commentaries. The show's production had been a gamble from the start, bringing back the series as a remake instead of a continuation, completely reapproaching the look and feel of a science fiction series, and ending the first season on a cliffhanger, with no guarantee the ratings would continue to be as strong as they were at the beginning. Resolving the Season 1 cliffhanger would be no easy feat. Following Rosalind's removal from office and Adama being shot, the chaos scene at the conclusion of Season 1 would not be neatly wrapped up in a single episode to open Season 2. Instead, 6 episodes of the second season, including a two-parter, are dedicated to resolving the lingering questions from Cobal's last gleaming. In a way, Scattered Through to Home Parts 1 and 2 are really the conclusion of Season 1, and much like the beginning of the first season, the viewer is thrown right into the action as Colonel Ty suddenly finds himself in command of Galactica and cut off unexpectedly from the fleet. But it's here we see why Ty, despite being an alcoholic, is kept around by Adama as his XO. Far from being a disaster, Ty is able to take the Galactica through a full-on battle and boarding action. As a quick aside, I have to give praise to the visual effects in the series. Purely on a design level, the digital documentary camera and Galactica's use of a flak field creates a kind of space battle which had never been seen up until this point, but it's the lowered brightness and high contrast lighting which really allows the show's effects to stand up so well after so many years. Texture and simulation technology has certainly come a long way since, but Battlestar Galactica's visual effects are head and shoulders above the other sci-fi shows at the time. The Centurions are not quite as successful, the effects showing their age much more, however that doesn't detract from their sense of threat in the episode Valley of Darkness. In contrast to the cool-looking cannon fodder of the original show, these Cylons are lethal, vicious, and virtually indestructible to regular firearms. It's only by the 4th episode that the viewer is allowed to catch a well-earned breather as the show expands the scope of the plot to focus on multiple ongoing story threads. Kara reuniting with Hilo, encountering the other Sharon, and linking up with the Caprica resistance, Rosalind escaping custody and returning to Cobol with the help of Lee and Zarek, the linchpin of all these threads eventually coming together being Adama's return to command. Although Ty proves himself to be a capable commander in an emergency, his handling of the civilian government, the Galactica, and the fleet at large outside of an emergency is disastrous. One would expect Adama's return to signal a reckoning for Ty's actions, but having survived a near-death experience, Adama shows he's a changed man. Throughout most of Season 1, Adama is almost totally inscrutable, playing his emotions so reservedly that even his own son isn't sure whether his father truly cares for him. Adama, going forward in Season 2, is a much more open person, expressing his emotions more freely. Although he initially chooses to leave Rosalind's rebels behind on Cobol, ultimately he and those around him have simply lost too much to keep fighting each other.
Mr. Gator, I want to see all recon material on Cobol immediately in my quarters.
Cobol?
Yes, I'm putting the fleet back together. I'm putting our family back together. This ends now.
Their reconciliation on Cobol, which brings them a step closer to finding Earth, manages to be very moving, reprising the end of the miniseries with Adama once again rallying the fleet to Rosalind's side. Even so, this is not back to business as usual, with the other Sharon now aboard Galactica, and more questions for Baltar after he definitively discovers that 6 is not a Cylon chip in his head.
And who? Or what? Are you?
I'm an angel of God sent here to protect you, to guide you, to love you.
To what end?
To the end of the human race.
After wrapping up the fallout of Season 1, Season 2 becomes defined by the appearance of the Battlestar Pegasus. Much like Hand of God, Pegasus is essentially a remake of the living legend from the original series.
On behalf of the officers and the crew of the Pegasus, welcome back to the Colonial Fleet.
But a choice which I think elevates the newer version is to have Adama become subordinate to Admiral Kane, played by the brilliant Michelle Forbes. Rather than Adama retaining his authority, forcing Kane to scheme to undermine him, Kane having authority over Adama allows the story to spearhead its central theme of extremism. The storyline between Sharon and Agathon becomes an integral part of this theme, as slowly but surely over the course of the first season, this version of Sharon proved herself to be a fully realized thinking and feeling person, not a ruthless automaton. In some respects, this was already shown with the various Sixes and Leoben, but Sharon turning against her own kind to be with Agathon cements the idea of each Cylon as an individual in their own right. Though their larger cultures may be opposed, on a very basic level there is little difference between human and Cylon, which is what makes their treatment by the Pegasus crew so shocking. For the Pegasus crew, nothing is off limits in achieving victory against the enemy. By the time they meet up with the Galactica, it's clear dishing out sadistic abuse has become the point. No longer fighting to save lives, but fighting simply to do harm. For much of the episode, the Galactica crew have to endure the injustices and indignities doled out to them as Kane asserts her authority. Thus, when Tyrell and Agathon are given a sham trial and sentenced to death for inadvertent manslaughter, while stopping the Pegasus crew abusing Sharon, Adama finally saying enough is enough is as gratifying as it is nerve-wracking.
Why are you launching Vipers?
Please arrange for Chief Tyrell and Lieutenant Agathon to be handed over to my Marines.
I don't take orders from you.
Call it whatever you like. I'm getting my men.
Though the conflict between Galactica and Pegasus is put on hold to deal with the Cylon resurrection ship, Adama and Kane's simultaneous assassination plots essentially serves as a test for each character's moral compass. In some ways, both of them are succumbing to the same extremism. Adama and Roslin view Kane as a monstrous tyrant, while Kane views Adama as a naive coward. While Kane's plot to murder Adama fits with her anything it takes to win ethos, Adama attempting the same thing breaks with his usually idealistic stance of there being certain lines that one simply does not cross. The razor-sharp tension in the last act of Resurrection Ship Part 2 is due in large part to what it would mean for these characters to actually go through with their respective plans. Will Kane's fanaticism be broken, or will Adama, by crossing that line, become just like her?
I've been thinking about what we talked about before. It's not enough to survive. One has to be worthy of surviving.
Congratulations, Jack.
Thank you, sir.
That's all.
Yes, sir.
Unfortunately, following the conclusion of Resurrection Ship, Season 2 suffers from a handful of weaker standalone episodes. Ronald D. Moore admitted that he struggled with these episodes, not having a clear picture of exactly what to do with them. None of them are overtly terrible, in fact Scar is a solid piece of character-driven space action, but other outings like Black Market do tend to drag the overall quality of the season down. Thankfully, the conclusion of the season ends the show's second year on a high. A finale which is truly striking in its boldness. Though the true finale is the two-parter Lay Down Your Burdens, its prologue is the excellent Downloaded. Having Tricia Helfer reprise her role as Caprica 6 for a story told entirely from the Cylon perspective is already compelling enough, but the inclusion of Caprica 6's own head, Boltar, is a stroke of genius.
That mission could be profoundly disturbing.
Disturbing? Which means sleeping with me or killing billions of people, because I rather thought you enjoyed sleeping with me.
Caprica 6 and the original Boomer using their status as heroes to the Cylon people to potentially usher in peace is a daring direction to take the larger story in. That daringness is also present in the Fleet storyline, as the discovery of a habitable planet hidden from Cylon detection triggers a leadership challenge which Boltar is poised to win. Once again, Roslin proves her cunning when she knowingly allows her campaign team to rig the election in her favor. Yet once again, Roslin's obstinacy clashes with Adama's idealism, forcing her to admit her wrongdoing and cede power to Boltar.
You won't do it.
Excuse me.
You try to steal this election, you'll die inside. Likely move your cancer right to your heart. You're gonna have to live with it.
It's the wrong choice.
Yes, it is.
So that's it. We just give it up, just like that.
The battle, perhaps. But not the war.
While these are crucially important moments for these characters, the substance of the plot is not too far outside the ordinary for Battlestar Galactica. That is, until a sudden one-year time jump. For the closing minutes of the episode, the usual status quo has irrevocably changed. Not only has the fleet settled on the world now known as New Caprica, but almost every character has had some kind of major development. Kara is married to former Resistance fighter Anders, Lee is married to Dawala aboard the Pegasus, Agathon is now Adama's XO, Gaeta has become Boltar's chief advisor, the list goes on. Television shows of the time, especially sci-fi ones, simply did not do this. For all viewers at the time knew, this could have meant the show centering entirely on New Caprica from this point forward. But even this new status quo isn't safe, as the Cylons return once again, forcing Galactica and Pegasus to flee and placing New Caprica under occupation.
Judgment Day.
As enticing as the prospect of setting an entire season on New Caprica may have been, entering Season 3, it soon became clear that the costs of location shooting every week, not to mention CG set extensions and a larger cast, wouldn't be feasible. Therefore, the New Caprica storyline would only take up the first 4 episodes of Season 3. That being said, those 4 episodes are squeezed for every ounce of drama possible to stunning success. Although Caprica 6 and Boomer's goals may have seemed noble, their actions are still ultimately authoritarian. They still view Cylons as inherently superior, and humanity needs to be taught a better way. This power dynamic is seized upon by Dean Stockwell in an excellent turn as Cavil, who clearly still believes the colonists deserve nothing less than brutal subjugation, if not outright extermination.
We round up the leaders of the insurgency and we execute them publicly. We round up at random groups off the street and we execute them publicly. The insurgency stops now, or else we start reducing the human population to a more manageable size.
In a sense, Caprica 6 and Boomer find themselves playing a key role in exactly the kind of hypocrisy they were attempting to fight. Mass murder, exploitation, and abuse are doled out on a seemingly daily basis, all the while the Cylons insist it's for the colonists' own good. Under such oppression, the colonists are divided as to how to live under Cylon rule. Colonel Tai, cut off from his wife and a victim of sustained torture, lashes out against the Cylons by condoning the use of suicide bombers, against the wishes of other rebels.
No more suicide bombings, Colonel. You understand?
What, are you working for the Cylons now?
I'm sorry, there's no excuse.
You know, sometimes I think that you've got ice water in those veins, and other times I think you're just a naive little schoolteacher.
At the same time, the show is not unsympathetic to the human collaborators, who see joining the Cylons as the only way to endure this nightmare. This tension between the colonists comes to a head in Exodus Part 2, when Ty's wife, Ellen, is outed as a traitor to the Resistance.
You know what has to be done here. And you don't want to do it. I understand, but believe me, Colonel, someone is gonna do this.
In this grueling scene, Ty is utterly broken as a man as he chooses to murder his own wife.
I love you.
You hear me?
Much like Hand of God, after enduring so much darkness, the Galactica finally coming in to rescue the colonists brings some well-earned catharsis. Though the mission is by no means easy, the episode manages to pack in plenty of fan-pleasing moments, such as the Galactica pulling off an atmospheric jump to launch its Vipers behind enemy lines.
Pulling it on!
And the Battlestar Pegasus going down in a blaze of glory. While ultimately victorious, the closing scene of the episode makes clear that the legacy of New Caprica will linger for a long time. As Adama reunites with his old friend and XO, the pain in Ty's voice turns triumph into heartbreak.
You did it. You brought him home, Saul.
Not all of them.
While a good chunk of Season 3 is dedicated to the quest for Earth, the legacy of New Caprica is really what characterizes the majority of the season. Not to say that the former is in any way uninteresting. Baltar's time spent with the Cylons continues to give us new insights into Cylon culture, setting up the mystery surrounding the mythical final 5 Cylon models. However, I've always found the interior of the Cylon base stars to be a little lackluster, and the tendency of scenes set aboard the base stars to feature almost constant cross-dissolves and background piano music becomes quite tiring after a while. That being said, the cast are always on top form, and this thread reaches a satisfying payoff in the episodes The Eye of Jupiter and Rapture, where the Colonials and Cylons have a tense standoff while attempting to find another clue to Earth's location. As well as taking a break from all your worries, when Baltar's return to the fleet and undergoes a surreal dreamlike interrogation. As mentioned before, however, the most engaging thread throughout Season 3 is the fallout from New Caprica. While Sharon is finally recognized as an equal crew member, adopting the call sign Athena, and Lee manages to find his strength again, other characters like Ty and Starbuck are forever damaged by their time on New Caprica. This lingering trauma is tapped for several strong episodes throughout the season. Wrestling with trauma, guilt and shame, and fighting to make sense of untold pain and suffering without justification is also a theme at the heart of Maelstrom. This is the episode which featured the shocking death of Kara Thrace. Behind the scenes, a killing off Starbuck proved to be an extremely controversial choice among the cast and crew. Edward James Olmos, who was especially fond of performing opposite Katie Sackhoff, even came close to staging somewhat of an uprising against Ronald D. Moore and David Icke in response. Thankfully, the actors were abated when the writer-producer duo explained their plans for the final 3 episodes. With the trial of Gaia's Baltar fast approaching, Lee Adama makes the startling decision to resign his commission and join Baltar's defense team. As a character, Lee Adama is often a source of frustration for the viewer. While the original Apollo was a straight-laced hero, Lee Adama seems somewhat aimless throughout his first 3 seasons. However, this is by design. In the Bible for the reimagined Battlestar Galactica, Lee's backstory was not as a combat pilot, but as a test pilot, and one who was planning on resigning from the military altogether after Galactica's originally planned decommissioning. In my opinion, I think this piece of information should have been made more explicit in the show, because it functions somewhat as a Rosetta Stone for the character's actions. He comes across as aimless because effectively he is aimless. He becomes the Galactica's CAG out of necessity, not desire. For a brief moment he seemed to find his calling as commander of the Pegasus, but this is whittled away even before the Cylons come to New Caprica. In The Sun Also Rises, Lee finally finds his true purpose outside of the military, something foreshadowed by his repeated insubordination where he sides with Roslin more often than his father. Spurred on by Baltar's lawyer, the eccentric Romo Lampkin played by Mark Shepard, Lee takes the stand to espouse his reasoning for defending Baltar in a monologue brilliantly delivered by Jamie Bamber, a performance which allegedly earned him a standing ovation from his fellow cast members on set.
I mean, it was an impossible situation. When the Cylons arrived, what could he possibly do? What could anyone have done? I mean, ask yourself, what would you have done? What would you have done?
In a 4-minute speech, Lee provides an impassioned account of all the mistakes, poor judgments, and twisted morality the fleet has been riding on for the entire series, and surmising the full extent of the damage done to the human race as a whole.
Colonel Tai used suicide bombers, killed dozens of people, forgiven. Lieutenant Agathon and Chief Tyrrell, they murdered an officer on the Pegasus, forgiven. The Admiral instituted a military coup d'etat against the president, forgiven. And me? I shot down a civilian passenger ship, the Olympic Carrier, over 1,000 people on board, forgiven. I raised my weapon to a superior officer, committed an act of mutiny, forgiven. And then, on the very day when Baltar surrendered to those Cylons, I, as commander of Pegasus, jumped away. I left everybody on that planet alone, undefended, for months. I even tried to persuade the Admiral never to return. If I'd had my way, nobody would have made it off that planet. I'd say we're very forgiving of mistakes. And we've had to be. Because we're not a civilization anymore. We are a gang. We have to break rules, we have to bend laws, we have to improvise. But not this time, no. Not for Gaius Baltar. You have to die. You have to die because we don't like you very much. Because you're arrogant. Because you're weak. Because you're a coward. This case is built on emotion, on anger, but most of all, it is built on shame. It's about the shame of what we did to ourselves back on that planet. And we're trying to dump all that guilt and all that shame onto one man, and then flush him out the airlock and hope that that just gets rid of it all. But that won't work. That won't work. That's not justice. Not to me. Not to me.
As the trial comes to an end and Baltar is narrowly found not guilty, the eruption of the crowd is only a taste of the chaos unleashed at the end of the show's 3rd season. The fleet is ambushed by another Cylon fleet, and as every ship capable of fighting races to mount a desperate defense, Lee spots an unknown ship on his scopes. Meanwhile, Anders, Tyrrell, Ty, and Tori are all drawn together by a strange but familiar song.
Must be some kind of way out of here.
Said the Joker to the thief.
There's too much confusion here.
I can't get no relief.
It's true. We're Cylons. And we have been from the start.
And if this jaw-dropping revelation wasn't enough, the viewer is hit with a 2-punch combo as Lee makes contact with the unknown ship.
Hi, Lee.
Kara? Don't freak out, it really is me.
I've been to Earth. I know where it is. And I'm gonna take us there.
And just to hammer everything home, Bear McCreary's fantastic rendition of All Along the Watchtower guides us through the galaxy, finally settling on a shot of Earth itself. By the end of its 3rd season, Battlestar Galactica was not only a hit for the Sci-Fi Channel, but a genuine cultural phenomenon. Not only had its fresh look and feel caught the attention of non-sci-fi fans, but savvy internet marketing and loving homages to the original series had successfully accrued a passionate fan base for the series. It had tapped into the cultural zeitgeist in a way no other sci-fi show had done, perhaps since Star Trek The Next Generation. But that meant that the pressure was mounting for the show to stick the landing in its final season. Unfortunately, the plans for the 4th season were hampered somewhat by a writer's strike, which threatened to potentially cut the show short. As a result, Season 4 would feature no standalone episodes, and would focus solely on wrapping up the main story arcs. At the turn of the final season, the characters feel the fabric of everything they know slipping away. Fan-favourite characters are revealed as Cylons, Kara Thrace comes back from the dead, and even the Cylons descend into a civil war, when they themselves start to repeat the cycle of destruction ushered in when humanity created the Cylons in the first place. Every relationship, power structure, and alliance seems to be coming apart at the seams. Even a brief alliance with the Cylon rebels is dramatically undercut when the fleet finally reaches Earth, only to discover it's an irradiated wasteland, having succumbed to a Cylon war of its own.
Centurions.
Similar, but they're not one of ours.
The 13th tribe settled here and created their own Cylons.
And then the machines rose up and killed their masters.
250 skeletons so far, from 4 different sites on the planet, using our protocols.
What's your point?
They're not human. They're Cylon.
The 13th tribe was Cylon.
The following episodes are truly the bleakest and most desperate of the entire show. Though some more puzzle pieces concerning the final 5 are dropped, overall an atmosphere of utter hopelessness eclipses the story. Gripped by despair, Tom Zarek and Felix Gaeta, seizing on the lingering hostility towards the Cylons, stage an all-out coup to take control of the fleet. And it's within this penultimate conflict that the real thesis of the story reveals itself. Battlestar Galactica, despite its darkness, is ultimately a very hopeful show. Much like the fleet's reunion at the start of Season 2, too much has been lost to keep fighting. Zarek and Gaeta, while understandable, even sympathetic in their motivations, want to go backwards by holding on to their hatred of the Cylons. The core message of the series, which builds upon Lee's speech during Boltar's trial, is to never give up on one another. Even when these people have lost their homes, family, friends, and even when the Galactica itself is falling apart, the characters have to keep helping each other in order to keep moving forward.
These are the Cylons that have died with us since the Alliance. I didn't know they were doing that, did you?
Which brings us to the 3-part series finale, Daybreak. As the Galactica is on its last legs, Adama launches a volunteer mission to rescue Athena and Agathon's daughter, Hera. Hera, being a human-Cylon hybrid, is the perfect symbol of unity and hope which the end of the season rests on. Even so, the finale still delivers a sledgehammer of a final action sequence, with the Galactica literally smashing full force into a Cylon base while being ripped apart by weapons fire and boarded by Centurions. Where the last episode becomes controversial is in its handling of the long-running, seemingly supernatural element. Ever since the revelation that Head 6 is not a Cylon chip in Boltar's head, and the near magical properties of the various ancient temples the Galactica crew encounters, this thread was the most potent source of fan speculation. Hence why anticipation was high for the final episode to at last pay off this mystery. But in the end, the most we get is confirmation of some kind of higher power at work, one which has guided them to this point, and one which ultimately leads them to Earth.
Because there's another force at work here. There always has been. Whether we want to call that God or gods or some sublime inspiration or a divine force that we can't know or understand, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's here. It exists. Good and evil, we created those. You want to break the cycle? Birth, death, rebirth, destruction, escape, death. And that's in our hands. In our hands only.
It's understandable why some fans would find this answer unsatisfying, but then again, I personally don't think any answer would really satisfy. If the show had defined who God was or revealed it was some supercomputer all along, I don't really see how that's better. While I can see why some people would refer to this particular payoff as unsatisfying, to call the finale overall unsatisfying is very unfair in my opinion. Because in terms of character, plot, and theme, the end of Battlestar Galactica resolves beautifully. The Cylon War comes to a brutal end, with Cavill and his ilk destined to die out without their resurrection technology, and the surviving Cylons now living alongside humanity as perhaps they always should have done. But it's the various character endings which never fail to move me personally in a profound way. The use of flashbacks is a great way of showing the viewer just how far all of these characters have come. Gaius Baltar finally does something truly selfless, allowing him to rekindle his love with Caprica 6. Athena and Agathon succeed in rescuing Hera, even Ty is reunited with Ellen. Seeing so many others get the chance to make a life with those they love makes Adama and Rosalind's end even more heartbreaking. Although they met as rivals and clashed many times, their relationship is so potent and the chemistry so engaging, it was basically inevitable that they would fall in love. From the beginning of the second season, these two always stuck by one another, through Laura's cancer, the Cylon occupation, and the futility of the quest for Earth. And having gone through all of that, having finally found the world they were searching for, Laura slips away. Where I think the show sticks the landing in terms of plot and theme is Lee's insistent that the fleet be sent off into the sun, and the human race, as well as the Cylons, can begin anew on this new world. However, as is very characteristic of the show, the ending poses a question to the audience without a solid answer.
All of this has happened before.
But the question remains. Does all of this have to happen again?
And yet, it remains hopeful.
Let a complex system repeat itself long enough, eventually something surprising might occur. That too is in God's plan.
Fans of the original Battlestar Galactica often wonder what could have been if the show had been allowed to continue. And while I'll always have a soft spot for vocoder-voiced Cylons and laser gun battles, in my view, the reimagined Battlestar Galactica is the fulfillment of that potential. It was a show led by a team who cleverly mined the rich established lore for new avenues of storytelling, and shook up the usual genre conventions to create one of the greatest science fiction television shows ever made. It was a series which brought the space opera genre down to earth, and yet by doing so, it allowed the themes and ideas of the show to resonate with the viewer more profoundly. It was a series which asked tough questions and tackled dark subject matter, yet despite that darkness, it was ultimately a hopeful show. The rich characters of Battlestar Galactica weren't the crew of the Enterprise. They weren't conceived of as superhumans to serve as examples for the audience, but there was power in showing us how even the most flawed and damaged people who have no business being in the roles they're in can still find the courage, strength, and the fortitude to do great things. And that's what Battlestar Galactica is ultimately about more than anything else. Human beings, whether they be lost tribes among the stars or artificial beings searching for purpose. It's a mirror for ourselves, and though we may see a lot of darkness in that reflection, there's still the potential for extraordinary and wonderful things. Battlestar Galactica is the result of years of hard work and dedication from a team who strived to create something truly special, and in this mission, they were most certainly successful. Battlestar Galactica the show may have definitively ended in its 4th season, but it was not the last we would see from this universe. Battlestar Galactica was a bona fide hit for Universal and the Sci-Fi Channel, but it was also a show which left some of its fans disappointed by its conclusion. However, the controversial ending of the series also presented the network and studio with an opportunity. In some ways, the backlash to the final episode was an indicator of lingering passion for the series, and so perhaps there was a way of giving fans what they wanted while also adding to the Galactica series. Previously, the series had great success with the straight-to-DVD movie Battlestar Galactica Razor, a semi-prequel showing the destruction of the 12 colonies from the Pegasus's point of view, and showing a previously unseen mission where the fleet takes on a Cylon force left over from the original war. In some ways, Razor replicated the success the Sci-Fi Channel and MGM had had with a number of straight-to-DVD Stargate films, The Ark of Truth and Continuum. Therefore, it seemed logical to try the same model on their new hit series. To satisfy fans of the show without breaking the continuity of the series, the solution was to create a standalone film showing key events in the series from the Cylon point of view. However, the foundation for this concept was to be built on somewhat shaky ground.
The only thing that sort of never quite added up, I think, for people or for us is that, the opening title that says, "And they have a plan," which I will never forgive David Icke for putting into the show. You did it, David.
We knew we were doing a show that was, to a degree, slightly Byzantine, slightly complicated, that was going to explore a lot of depth of mythos and get into some areas that were going to be challenging. And we wanted to assure the audience that we weren't just screwing with them. So, "And They Have a Plan" was a way to do that. When we actually saw it in writing on the main title, I remember Ron and I calling each other and saying, "Are we sure we want to do this? It's really cheesy. And they have a plan."
Production began on the 8th of September 2008, with most major cast members reprising their roles. Edward James Olmos directed the new scenes for the film, having previously helmed a number of episodes of the show. Because production was so close to the final season of the show, the plan was able to reuse all existing standing sets, as well as the usual locations around Vancouver. The post-production team was also the same as the series, with visual effects by Zoic Studios supervised by Gary Hutzel and music by Bear McCreary. A notable new track produced for the film was the song Apocalypse, a new arrangement of the theme used in the opening credits of the show. The song was performed live at San Diego Comic-Con as part of a wider performance of Battlestar Galactica's music. Over 6 months after the end of Battlestar Galactica, the plan was released on home video and aired on the Sci-Fi Channel the following January. As a standalone film, Battlestar Galactica: The Plan has its moments, but overall feels very perfunctory. The idea of showing established events from the Cylon point of view is certainly an intriguing one, but it's a concept which isn't capitalized on outside of the opening act. Seeing the destruction of the 12 colonies in full, as opposed to largely off-screen as it was in the miniseries, is as spectacular as it is terrifying. The visual effects are top-notch, and Bear McCreary's music conveys the emotion of the sequence beautifully. It's a solid start to the film, but it largely peters out by the time the story catches up with the events of the actual show. The truth is, despite what the opening titles of the show say, the Cylons never really had a plan.
What's the plan?
The plan is, everything blows up a week ago. All humans are dead, we Cylons all download, and the universe basks in justice. However...
It didn't fracking happen.
Exactly.
Now, I've recently gone over how this isn't necessarily a problem in terms of a creative approach to writing, but to have the characters state this explicitly is another thing altogether. Watching the characters engage in this scattershot campaign to take down the fleet is far from compelling drama. While there is an attempt to bridge the gaps in the narrative with theme, the plot ends up feeling disjointed and the pacing feels uneven. The plan's greatest flaw is that it adds so little of note to the story. Episodes of the show like Downloaded succeeded far more in showing the viewer the Cylon perspective, what the Cylons believe in, their culture, their drives and goals and so on. But there's little if any of that in the plan that we haven't already seen from the show. For the most part, the film is content to answer rather unimportant questions in the grand scheme of things. Most of the new scenes only exist to dramatize moments which we could intuit happened off screen during the show. Because of this, despite the efforts of the cast, who are all very strong, most of the material they have to work with is quite dull. Ultimately, the biggest problem with the plan is that it was simply ill-conceived. A project created to maintain a brand rather than tell a story, and driven by a creative team who didn't seem to have much interest in the concept to begin with. It fails to add anything substantial to the story of the show or these characters, beyond filling in a few background details. In the end, it's little more than a novelty. Although by most accounts the plan sold reasonably well on home video, reception was extremely mixed. The visual effects, music, and performances were praised, but overall most fans opined that the plan didn't really do justice to the series it was built on. Despite the workmanlike production and lukewarm reception of the plan, Ronald D. Moore and David Icke were still keen on another BSG-adjacent project. The duo had bandied about the idea of a spin-off series as early as Battlestar Galactica's second season. However, Moore and Icke had no desire to make a sequel series, the ending of the show essentially making such a project untenable. At the time, there seemed to be a rather obvious direction to go in for a prequel spin-off, a series following a young William Adama set during the First Cylon War. Fans already had a taste of this during the flashback sequences in Razor, which were also expanded into a handful of webisodes. While Ronald D. Moore and David Icke were mulling over ideas for a spin-off, writer Remy Aubuchon, known at the time for his work on 24 and who would later work on Stargate Universe and Falling Skies, pitched a movie to Universal Pictures about artificial intelligence. While Universal didn't pick up his movie, they asked him to bring his ideas to Moore and Icke, who instantly took a liking to them. Soon the trio came up with a new concept, a prequel but one set far earlier on Caprica at its height, showing the birth of the Cylon race. It was in fact Ronald D. Moore who didn't want to do a prequel following Adama during the First Cylon War. He said, "You don't try to repeat the formula. Everything about Caprica was designed specifically not to do what we had done in Galactica." While this was a surprising direction to take a BSG spin-off in for most fans, it did have a certain logic to it. A big part of Battlestar Galactica is the influence of ancient mythology. While Galactica drew from the epic quests of that mythology, Caprica was to be more akin to a Greek tragedy. Like Battlestar Galactica, the cast of Caprica was a healthy mix of established stars and young newcomers. Eric Stoltz and Issei Morales, both highly successful film and TV actors, were the marquee names to occupy the leads of the series Daniel Greystone and Joseph Adama, respectively. The supporting cast was made up of numerous veteran TV actors, such as Paula Malcolmson as Amanda Greystone, Sasha Royce as Sam Adama, Brian Markinson as Jordan Durham, and Polly Walker as Sister Clarice Willow. Making up the younger cast was Alessandra Torresani as Zoe Greystone and Magda Apanowitz as Lacey Rand. Despite the terrestrial setting of Caprica, in some ways it turned out to be more visual effects intensive than Battlestar Galactica. While the production re-enlisted the talents of visual effects supervisor Gary Hutzel, the bulk of the work was done by an in-house team rather than Zoic Studios, who had worked on BSG. Not only did the Vancouver skyline need to be augmented with CG buildings, but many more CG environments were created for various other colonies like Toron and Geminon. The series also featured a number of virtual sets. The music was once again handled by Bear McCreary. For Caprica's score, McCreary eschewed some of the ethnic instruments used in Battlestar Galactica, instead favouring traditional orchestral instruments like piano, cello, and even opera vocals. Following production on the pilot episode, Ronald D. Moore stepped away from the series, handing over showrunning duties to Jane Espenson, who had worked as a writer-producer on Battlestar Galactica. The series premiered with a feature-length pilot on the 22nd of January 2010. Experimentation is always something I commend, but Caprica is quite a baffling product. Pairing dynastic family drama with high-concept science fiction is certainly a unique combination, and under different circumstances, it's an idea which could have found a solid audience. But as the prequel to the massively successful Battlestar Galactica, it's most definitely the last thing fans of the show were expecting from a spin-off. Though that's not to say this subversion makes Caprica a failure by any means. The strongest aspect of the show is its world building. The different cultures of the 12 colonies and the conflicts between them is something Battlestar Galactica often mined for some compelling drama. Thus, the world of Caprica and the 12 colonies in general feels lived in, grounded, and tangible. Immediately identifiable in the broad strokes, but thoroughly unique in the granular details. The Taurons in particular are very well developed. Small touches like their use of ancient Greek as their native language, symbolic tattoos and ceremonial daggers, it all adds up to a vision of a people which feels akin to any number of religious or immigrant communities one may see in any number of cities, but it's an element which also feels wholly part of this familiar universe. In terms of presentation, the visual effects are less consistently strong. The cityscapes and the Cylon prototypes hold up well, but the fully computer-generated sequences haven't aged as well. It works more as a stylistic choice during the scenes taking place inside a virtual reality, but during scenes set in what is meant to be the real world, it can be quite jarring. Like Battlestar Galactica, however, the cast is very strong. Eric Stoltz and Issei Morales comfortably deliver the most captivating performances of the show. The relationship between Joseph Adama and Daniel Greystone is what anchors the entire series. The Greystones walk in the upper echelons of society, rubbing shoulders with the most rich and powerful, whereas the Adamas occupy the underworld, maintaining ties with organized crime and street gangs. However, it's the Greystones and their world which seems to be the most cutthroat and brutal. The Greystones are repeatedly betrayed and backstabbed. In response, they will seemingly go to any lengths, say anything, do anything, not only to survive, but to triumph. The Adamas and the other Tauron clans, on the other hand, maintain strict codes of honor. Alliances are often fragile, and their way of life has a certain brutality to it, but there are always lines they refuse to cross, even if it's to their detriment. The setup for the series actually has a lot of promise. The tragedy which links the Greystones and Adamas works very well as a catalyst to drive further conflict between the families themselves and within their respective worlds. Zoe and Tamara continuing to exist in virtual reality, their links to the monotheistic religion later adopted by the Cylons, and the rising tension of the Cylons slowly reaching sentience is all very engaging on a conceptual level, and in practice for the most part as well. However, at times Caprica struggles to sustain these plot threads. Almost every arc becomes stretched a little thin, necessitating a number of contrivances to undo some of their progress. A good example is Joseph Adama's struggle to move on from his daughter's death. He starts the series naturally broken by this loss, but a virtual duplicate simultaneously gives him hope she can come back, and also deepens his pain even more.
It's okay, baby. I'm right here.
My heart isn't beating.
I miss you.
Daddy, my heart isn't beating. Why isn't my heart beating? Why isn't my heart beating? Why isn't it?
She couldn't feel her heart. She couldn't feel her heart.
She'll adjust. She's probably very confused by everything. It's only natural.
No, it's not natural. No, it's wrong. It's an abomination.
But after much heartache, he accepts Tamara is gone. In a touching scene, the Adamas hold a funeral ceremony.
Do you have a coin for me, Yosef?
I have a coin for my wife, Shannon Adama.
I have a coin for my sister, Tamara Adama.
Will you grant them passage?
They will have passage. Will you let them go? Will you bid them farewell?
Goodbye, Shannon. Goodbye, Tamara.
Goodbye, Tamara. Goodbye, Mom.
Featuring a reprise of Wonder My Friends from Battlestar Galactica's score, the emotional impact of the scene is keenly felt. However, this is soon undercut by Joseph discovering Tamara's virtual self has escaped into a popular sim game, which plunges him back into his grief as he struggles to find her, only for Tamara herself to push him away by the end. Essentially, the character arrives at the same place, but because of this reset, it feels as though Joseph's character is running in place for several episodes. This is an example which is illustrative of most of the plot threads in the series. Caprica would have certainly benefited from having a shorter first season. Despite those issues, however, the conclusion of the series is very strong. Polly Walker makes for a striking villain as Clarice Willow, in some ways echoing Deep Space Nine's Kai Wynn. Someone who puts up a nurturing, caring front, but only to hide a ruthless lust for power underneath. And in its final episode, the seemingly disparate elements of dynastic family drama, cyberpunk religiosity, and killer robot-infused crime thriller somehow works. And it's sentences like that which make it easy to see why Caprica developed such a vocal cult fanbase. Unfortunately, that fanbase wasn't big enough to sustain the series, and before Caprica wrapped its first season, the show was cancelled due to low ratings. Despite the small audience the show managed to reach, its cancellation was by no means a surprise. Experimentation and originality should always be encouraged and commended, but put simply, Caprica just wasn't what most Battlestar Galactica fans wanted out of a spin-off. It's a somewhat paradoxical piece of work. Caprica was a series which aimed to be totally different to Battlestar Galactica and appeal to a new audience. Yet, the main reason Caprica was made at all was due to its connection to Battlestar Galactica and that show's fanbase. As it stands, Caprica exists as a curiosity, far more substantive than a novelty like The Plan, but less consistent than Battlestar Galactica. As a result, it's full of interesting ideas and characters, but hampered by contrived plotting and uneven pacing. Personally, I can appreciate the creative team behind Caprica swinging for the fences, but on this occasion, it was a swing and a miss. As Caprica was still airing its first season, Universal and Sci-Fi also began developing another Battlestar Galactica project, which was to be an episodic video game which followed a young William Adama during the First Cylon War. Though Ronald D. Moore was involved, the project was primarily developed by David Icke and Michael Taylor, who had previously worked on Battlestar Galactica as a writer-producer. Allegedly, Sci-Fi were so impressed by the finished script that they decided to shelve the video game idea and instead develop the project as a television show titled Blood and Chrome. In the leading role as a young William Adama was British actor Luke Pasqualino, known in the UK for the teen drama Skins, as well as the action-adventure series The Musketeers. Joining Adama on his first adventure was grizzled Raptor pilot Coker, played by Canadian actor Ben Cotton. Completing the trio for the adventure was Hungarian-American actress Lily Bourdan as Dr. Becca Kelly. The supporting cast included a number of familiar faces from both Battlestar Galactica and Caprica. A familiar voice was Tricia Helfer, reprising her role as Number 6 for a brief scene at the end of the pilot. Production was once again based in Vancouver, Canada. However, the standing sets from Battlestar Galactica had since been dismantled. Icke and CG supervisor Doug Drexel had been toying with the idea of fully virtual production. Rather than rebuilding the physical sets used for Galactica, its interiors and most other locations would be fully computer-generated, something which Gary Hutzel and Doug Drexler had previously experimented with on Caprica. It was an incredibly ambitious idea, as at the time most TV shows only featured 75 to 120 visual effects shots per episode. Blood and Chrome, however, would end up featuring over 1,800 visual effects shots. At the time, this number of shots wasn't even commonplace in big-budget feature films. Almost every scene involved the actors on a green or blue screen set, with only a few props and extras for them to interact with. Perhaps due to Blood and Chrome's origins as a video game project, Universal and Sci-Fi often flip-flopped on the exact format Blood and Chrome would be released in. Initially, it was pitched as a web series. Battlestar Galactica had already seen success in this format with a number of webisodes which served as supplementary content for a number of episodes of the show. However, Blood and Chrome's larger budget seemed to warrant a traditional TV broadcast. Then again, it could have followed Razor and The Plan as another straight-to-DVD movie. In the end, Blood and Chrome was released as a 12-part web series in November 2012 on the now defunct Machinima YouTube channel. The following year it aired on the Sci-Fi channel and was later released on DVD and Blu-ray. After the family-focused drama of Caprica, which left many Galactica fans indifferent, Battlestar Galactica Blood and Chrome jumps back into the sci-fi action for a fast-paced adventure. The visual effects are incredibly impressive, especially for a television production of the time. The sheer volume of work on display made to this standard on this budget level is staggering. The only caveat is that much of that excellent visual effects work on display is eclipsed by a gluttony of lens flares. This was no doubt a conscious choice to help blend the live-action computer-generated imagery, but it does make certain scenes appear too visually busy, and the image ends up being too murky at times. The hangar bay scenes are probably the biggest offenders in this regard. However, with darker, high-contrast lighting, the effect works very well. Having seen the behind-the-scenes footage, it's surprising to learn just how few practical elements were on set. Luke Pasqualino and Ben Cotton make for strong leads as Adama and Coker respectively. Pasqualino embodies a healthy mix of maverick hotshot pilot swagger and juvenile naivete, while Ben Cotton slips into the short-tempered, crotchety grease monkey role nicely. As characters, they're quite close to some very typical archetypes, but both actors have enough charisma and the writing is strong enough to make it work. They also have the benefit of encountering a plethora of memorable one-off supporting characters. Perhaps Blood and Chrome suffers from being a little too traditional as a sci-fi action-adventure flick. It retains many hallmarks of Battlestar Galactica, like the grounded technology and handheld shooting style, but whereas BSG felt bold and surprising with its story choices, Blood and Chrome is much more familiar. That's not to say that familiarity detracts from the film though. Blood and Chrome is packed with thrilling action and spectacular effects. The characters are compelling and the performances are strong across the board. If one wishes to see some fast-paced Battlestar Galactica action, then Blood and Chrome has it in spades. But it's difficult to see what would have made a Blood and Chrome series all that special. Ultimately, like Caprica, it amounts to a curiosity. Both projects were well produced, but neither of them really lived up to their predecessor. It's honestly quite difficult to gauge how successful Blood and Chrome was, and part of this is due to how it was released. These days, a web series with such a recognizable brand name would naturally debut on a premium streaming platform. However, in 2012, Netflix was yet to dominate this space with its own original programming. Even so, a direct-to-YouTube release through Machinima stands out as being quite an odd move. It's highly likely this release strategy hurt Blood and Chrome's chances of being picked up for a series. Even with high viewership upon release, YouTube video views and TV ratings aren't mutually exclusive. 2.5 million views would be considered solid ratings for a basic cable channel, but on YouTube the return on investment isn't nearly as high, especially considering Blood and Chrome's budget. By the time Blood and Chrome did air on Sci-Fi, it attracted only 1.14 million viewers, likely because the target audience had already watched it online. Even with decent home video sales, it wasn't enough to convince Sci-Fi to order a full series. Although the reimagined Battlestar Galactica universe would later be revisited in the excellent strategy game Deadlock, Blood and Chrome unfortunately marked the end of this era of the franchise on the small screen. However, at the time of writing, a new Battlestar Galactica series is currently in active development. While I, like many others, have grown tired of oversaturation of long-running multimedia franchises, Battlestar Galactica is markedly different. I'm someone who grew up watching the original Battlestar Galactica series reruns, and watched the Reboot series as a teenager. Because of how strikingly different both shows are, it actually makes the prospect of another reboot partly exciting. The 2003 reimagined version has set the precedent that anything goes. Long-established characters can return in any form, or be joined by fresh new characters. The relationships between them can be reinterpreted in any number of radical new ways. Tonally, Galactica is free to swing wildly between operatic adventure and gritty military drama. While other franchises end up growing stale, Battlestar Galactica has the license to be as original and bold as it wants to be. In some ways, it has become the modern version of the myths which inspired it, constantly retold and revised from generation to generation. I've thoroughly enjoyed both versions of the mythos we've had thus far, and I look forward to seeing what else comes in the future. There may yet be new destinations for the Battlestar Galactica and its ragtag fugitive fleet to find. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video and want to see more, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on future uploads. On my Patreon, you can see videos early and ad-free. The link is in the description. Thank you to all of my patrons and members, with an ultra thanks to Sub-Commander Ethan Latimer, Dan Hylands, Glenn Miller, Stuart McInnes, Socially Selective Adventure Club, Jonathan Wilbanks, Connor Matthews, Tim Spott, Eamon Kelly, Michael Hardy, County Ark, Mike Halsey, Olivia Computer, Bano, Jaron Walker, Tom, Director Kate, Patrick Fleming, Matthew Camille, Lilac Yane, Ed Mark Starr, Extreme Streamers, Howard Craig Kervik, and AS Caging 101. Thank you once again for watching, and until next time, have a good one.